You arrive at the outer arch close to evening, when the heat has thinned and the dust no longer glitters in the air but hangs in a calm veil. The arch is higher than you expect, heavy with brick and lime, its edges rubbed smooth by the touch of many hands, its shadow wide enough to cool your face before you step inside. The threshold stone is worn to a shallow trough, and when your sandal meets it, you feel the shallow groove as a kind of welcome, evidence that others have paused here to do the same ordinary thing, to ask for a place to sleep, a place to water animals, a place to be only a traveller among travellers. At the right of the gate stands the gatekeeper's bench, carved from a single beam of wood, polished by elbows and ledgers. You notice the iron ring that holds the great key. It looks almost ceremonial, but it is just heavy iron, practical metal for a door that must close at night. You are not the first to enter. A string of camels, unloaded and lean, sneaks in before you with the long groan of leather and a bell's dull note. Behind you comes a pair of cart oxen, patient, breathing evenly, and the cart's axle ticks as if counting the last moments of the day. You stop before the gatekeeper. He is not alone. The muharrir, the record keeper, sits cross-legged with reed pen and folded paper, a wooden tablet beneath to give the nib some firmness. His lamp is not yet lit. There is still enough day to see the inklines dry to a faint shine. He does not look up first. He listens, and in the listening he weighs several things: your dress, your dust, your accent when you greet him. Then his eyes rise, and you see only the work on his mind. Another name, another line in a book, another entry that will decide where you sleep and what you pay. You state your name, the town you started from, the place you hope to reach. The words feel simple in your mouth. You have said them often on the road. I'm from there, I go to there. The gatekeeper nods toward your bundle, asks what you carry. You present what matters: a small cloth purse with coins, a travel pass issued at the last town, a letter of introduction folded in oilcloth to keep out dust and sweat. He breaks the seal of the pass with his thumbnail and reads aloud softly, as if reassuring the courtyard that the page says what it should say. The pass is a courtesy, not a magic spell. Without it you could still enter, but with it you stand straighter and sense the tension in your shoulders ease. He gestures toward the Mahara, who draws a neat line and writes your name. You watch the line of entries above yours: a charcoal seller with 2 goats, a saffron dealer from the uplands, a mason seeking work in the next town, a widow travelling with her brother's family, 3 soldiers with 1 horse between them, a courier who will not stay but wants water. The columns are brief: name, origin, destination, goods if any, animals, coin paid or owed. The ledger does not judge, it remembers. That is enough for a place like this. When he asks your coin, you feel the cool press of metal against your palm, and the old thought crosses your mind that Sher Shah Suri's standard of coin still governs your scale of comfort on the road. Silver is heavy, copper is plentiful, gold is not for rooms. You count out the small copper dams for the gate fee and stable space. Keep the silver safe for larger purchases farther along. The Mahara slides 1 coin into a small box, another into a cloth pouch, 1 for the Sarai's daily repairs, 1 for the watchman. You're aware of the fairness. There is a posted rate, scratched with a nail on a wooden board beside the bench. It is not generous, but it is known, and the knowledge itself is a kind of rest. Inside the gate, the courtyard opens in a rectangle, the sky a calm slab of pale colour above it. Around the courtyard, low cells with arched doors wait like quiet mouths. Some are already dark with occupants. A child's laugh escapes one, the cough of a tired man from another. Along the inside of the walls a raised platform runs, a sill wide enough to sit and keep your load from the dust. In the middle, a square tank holds water, its brick sides neat, its surface dull and scattered with the smallest ripples from a leather bucket being drawn at the far corner. A boy at the bucket does not look up when you pass. He has a small rope burn on his palm that glows like a thread. You are directed to a cell with a floor of beaten earth and a niche in the wall for a lamp. The door's wooden bolt slides with a soft groan. The grain of the wood has swelled a little from last week's rain. The cell is not private in the modern sense, you hear everything, but privacy is different here, measured by the courtesy of not looking at a neighbour too long, by the custom of turning your face away when someone arranges their bedding. You spread your mat and sit. The first feeling is not comfort. It is relief from the exposure of the road. You could sit here for an hour and do nothing and feel that you have done something important. Outside, near the gate, a small stall tends to the small knots that bind travelling days together. The Bandari, the storekeeper, has salt, a little ghee, a coil of rope, a stack of clay cups, a few lamps, and a braided whetstone, some dried figs in a cloth sack. He sells firewood by the armful measured against a mark on a post. His hands move with the pace of someone who has never travelled far, but whose goods have gone farther than he will ever go. You buy a clay cup because yours cracked last week and then finally split like an egg. You place it on the raised ledge, pour water from the tank and let the clay smell rise up into your nose. It is the smell of all sarais, you think. Clay, damp, lamp soot, old wood. Beyond the Bandari you see the stable area, set apart by a low wall. The animals are the loudest and also the calmest presences. A row of camels kneeling, their long gums showing. When they chew. 2 cart oxen swaying gently as if they cannot be still even when at rest. A soldier's horse flicking its ears and stamping once, then also surrendering to the quiet. You note the buckets, the stone trough, the groom with his brush of dried grass tied together like a broom without a handle. He moves slowly. In slowness, animals trust you, and on the road it is wise to be trusted by anything bigger than you. At the courtyard's far corner, a small mosque leans out from the wall, with a simple mihrab and a flat roof edged in terracotta tiles. The plaster shows a few flower shapes, nothing more than the suggestion of petals. It is not a grand place. It does not need to be. The road itself is grand enough, you think. The line that ties cities and markets, the reason that this sarai was built at all. You will pray, or you will sit with your eyes half closed, and either way your mind will settle into the rhythm of pahars, those quarter days that ring through a traveller's hours more surely than bells. The Miri-Sarai appears as evening deepens, a man with an iron key and a calm face, moving along the arcade with a watchman behind him. He asks after doors and lamps, checks the gate latch, instructs a boy to sweep a patch of the courtyard where a sack of grain split earlier. He does not ask you questions unless he needs to. He speaks to the Mahara about 2 men quarrelling over the same corner of platform. The Mahara shakes his head and shows where their entries lie in the ledger, and the names end the argument more quickly than raised voices could. The Miri-Sarai nods, knocks once on the wooden gate with the back of his knuckles as if to confirm what his eyes have already told him. The hinges hold, the bar sits straight, the night will be secure. You notice how the Sarai rules live not on paper alone but in the habits of everyone inside. The animals keep to their quarter. Fires are lit only at the edges in small hearths of 3 stones. Laughter softens after the call to prayer. No one sharpens a blade after dusk. No one sings loudly unless asked. When a problem arises, the Miri-Sarai hears it first, and then the gatekeeper, and if it grows larger, a note is carried to the Courtyard in the nearest town. You find comfort in the layered order. It is a woven thing. Watchmen, keys, ledgers, boundaries, custom. You're inside a pattern that has been used before. By the time lamps are lit, the sky in the courtyard is the same colour as the oil in the lamps, brownish, with a seam of gold where the last light lies along the edges of the roof tiles. The Mahara lights his lamp with a twist of cotton wick and a pinch of oil from a clay stopper. He bends, looks again at the day's column, and adds a dot beside one entry that indicates an arrears to be settled at dawn. Small marks settle small disputes later. On the road, memory is a tool, not simply a faculty. The smells change as cooking begins, and the quiet changes too. It is not louder, it is thicker, as if the courtyard had taken on more life without adding more sound. On your hearth, borrowed stones you return after, the pot shows a little steam, and the surface of the lentils turns from a single colour to a constellation of darker bubbles. A neighbour offers a pinch of salt and a crumb of jaggery to improve your pot's temper. You trade a piece of dried fig. This is all the commerce most travellers need at day's end. A thing for a thing, and the easy knowledge that tomorrow each of you will see different faces in a different courtyard. When you have eaten and rinsed the cup and washed your hands, you wander to the edge of the courtyard where a series of painted marks on the wall indicates distances to certain towns along the road, counted in kos. The numbers mean less to your feet than the memory of them. 3 more days to the next market of size, 1 day to a bridge, a half day to a junction where the road splits as if making up its mind. You feel that if you traced your finger along the wall, the paint would dust your skin with the idea of distance, not the fact of it. You look back toward the gate. The iron has darkened with night, and the ring of the key looks like a small moon against the wood. The gate is still open. Stragglers come in, each with the same look, the sudden relief of being counted. A courier appears just before the bar goes down. He carries nothing but a staff and a small bag, and his breath comes in sharp pulls. The gatekeeper knows him, makes a note without a word, offers him water, and the man leaves before the lamp beside the ledger has burned halfway down the wick. You remember then that the road is not only for those who move at the pace of animals. In the dark, people move messages at the pace of lungs. The night watch is called. The bar is set. You hear the wooden thud echo in the arch like a soft drum. The Narration takes a slow round, checks the corners of the courtyard where shadows can pool, adjusts a lamp's wick with the end of a twig, and leaves just enough light that a sleeper waking at midnight can find the water and his cell. You notice the small things that make rest possible. A broom leaned against the wall in easy reach, a stack of spare clay cups below the public niche, a coil of rope for a traveller who must tie a restless calf. Little arrangements build large peace. You return to your cell. The floor feels warm through your mat from the day's heat stored in the earth. You set your bundle as a pillow and place your shoes beside the door, toes pointing outward. An old habit so that in the morning you can slip into them without turning your back to the doorway. The scraped plaster of the niche holds your lamp, now a low flame. You blow it out and the smoke thread lifts and vanishes, and in the first deep moment of dark you hear the courtyard as a single thing. A night animal snorts, a pot lid tips and settles, someone clears a throat in sleep, then the quiet separates again into smaller quiets. Here, you think, is the simple life of a sarai, and it is large because it is simple. It shelters the not-quite stillness between two moving days. It records in a ledger the names of people who will never meet again, and yet share a wall for one night. It holds food and water and a square of earth long enough for a body to become less heavy, a mind to become less crowded. You do not need more. You would not refuse more if it came, but you do not need it. In a place where the door closes with an iron bar and the watchman's staff taps the stones in a steady pattern, the traveller's best luxury is predictability. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder about the life of the sarai when no travellers are here. Does the courtyard feel larger or smaller? Do the lamps smell different when they burn only for the watchman? Does the ledger on the Muharrir's lap grow light, as if the absence of names could be measured like the presence of them? And when the first pahar of the night passes and the second begins, does the Narration sense the change without looking at the sky, the way a boatman feels the river's turn without seeing the bend? The questions follow you into the soft dark, not urgent, only steady. Morning will come, the bar will lift, you will pay a small coin for the room and the stable, you will nod to the gatekeeper who will not remember your face but will remember your entry. New names will take your place on the platform ledge by evening, and the old groove at the threshold will grow another grain deeper under another heel, and you think, with the last tidy corner of your waking mind, that in a world of grand palaces and crowded markets, it is this plain courtyard, this gate, this ledger, this tank of water that keeps the road honest. If the sarai were not here, what would hold the nights together between the days? You wake to the thin grey before dawn when the courtyard is neither dark nor light, and the lamps look indecisive, their smoke drifting sideways in the cool air. The first sound you notice is not birds or voices but a brush whispering across the paving. A boy sweeping grit toward a corner, coaxing the night's dust into an orderly line. It is not tidiness for its own sake. Grit dulls hooves, makes ankles slip, and works into the seams of wheels. You are reminded that in places built for passing through, maintenance is the true hospitality. When you step out from your cell, the square tank surface is flat enough to show a pale smear of sky. A clay jar stands beside the steps with a narrow mouth covered by a folded leaf. It keeps the water a little cooler for drinking than the basin can manage. You rinse your hands, note the faint lime smell common to wells lined with burnt lime mortar, and realise that even the water carries the sarai's materials within it. The plaster that sealed last decade now seasons today's cup. You walk the perimeter slowly, as if reading the building. The walls show three kinds of brick: older, deeper red bricks near the base, a later course with a thinner profile and a slightly more purplish hue, a patch where sun-dried replacements sit like dull teeth among fired ones. Between them is lime mortar mixed with crushed brick, cirky, giving it a grainy rose. You run your fingertips across one joint and feel the fine sand that once came from a riverbed, now living a quieter life as glue. The arches are segmental rather than high and pointed, a choice made for strength and speed more than display. You understand as you look that this serai is not a monument to a ruler, but a machine that serves a road. Its beauty, such as it is, lies in proportions that do not draw attention to themselves. At the corner, near the small mosque, a shallow niche holds a stone weight and a beam balance. Yesterday evening, it had blended into the wall. In morning light you see it clearly, and you realise it has two lives. By day, a public scale for small trades inside the walls. By night, a reminder that the serai regulates measure and price. You think of the posted rates by the gate and understand the arrangement better now. The mirror serai governs not only doors and lamps, but also the small market that flowers each afternoon and folds before the bar falls. His authority is practical, a single hand gathering small ropes so that none pull against the others. The Miri Serai himself is already walking, bareheaded, with a shawl over one shoulder. He stops with the Pandari to count firewood bundles, touches the stacked clay cups as if judging their hardness by the sound they make when lightly tapped, and then moves on to the stables. You follow at a respectful distance, noticing how his circuit sketches a diagram of what must work for the road to work. Animals watered, fodder measured, refuse carried out the postern to the pit beyond the wall, troughs scrubbed with a handful of sand. He pauses at the trough and scrapes the lip with a shard of broken cup, smoothing an unevenness that irritates his eye. The work is menial only if you think that comfort is a luxury. On the road, comfort is a tool that prevents delay. A groom brings in a bundle of gram straw bound with a wick of twisted fibre. The Miri Sarai nods and asks a question about the fodder's source. The answer matters, you realise, because the serai is part of a supply web you do not see. A farmer just beyond the next town grows more gram than grain because caravans pass here. A potter's wheel turns steadily because travellers chip cups and buy replacements. A lime burner across the river counts on repairs made after the rains. The serai is not an island. It is a low hill in a landscape of exchanges. Near the gate, the muharir is already at his board, last night's column open to the final entries. You see a dot beside your name indicating dues to be settled on departure. Nothing dramatic, simply the balance of room and stable. He draws a faint diagonal line through the oldest entries, those who left before dawn. You understand the rhythm now. Names flow in by evening, flow out by first light, and the ledger is a river cut into paper so that departure can be noticed without fuss. It is not surveillance as you think of it in later centuries. It is a memory device for fairness. The gate remains barred until the Miri Serai gives a nod. Time is kept here not by a clock on a wall, but by the sun and by the watches of the night, pahars. You have learned to feel them. A watchman raps the gate's inner face twice with his staff, a signal as ceremonial and as ordinary as a baker's first cough before dawn. The bar lifts with a wooden sigh, the ring scrapes, and the day enters like a tide, a camel's protesting grunt, a cart creaking forward after an hour of dozing stillness, two men arguing mildly over a rope, a woman counting children with her eyes rather than her fingers. You settle your account with the muharir. He totals without drama: room, hearth space, stable, one armful of wood, one clay cup. The numbers are small enough to carry in the mind. You pay in copper, keep your silver. He bites one coin lightly, a habit, not suspicion, and slides your pass back toward you, resealed with a smear of lamp soot to mark that it was checked here. You realise the pass itself accumulates traces of the road, fingerprints, smudges, a corner turned soft and seals that are not meant to hold a secret, shut so much as to leave a breadcrumb trail of authority. Before you go, you find your curiosity tugging you along a corridor to a secondary gate, narrow and plain, that opens toward a strip of kitchen gardens just outside the wall. The postern admits only feet and baskets, not carts. A woman in a coarse cotton sari carries in a shallow wicker tray of fenugreek leaves. The Pandari will dry some for the week's stews, the rest go straight to morning meals. You stop and look down at the soil, a crumbly brown loam, lifted in short ridges to keep channels wet. There is a rotation of sorts here. greens in the cool months, gourds when heat comes on, a patch of coriander whenever cooks asked for it. The Serai grows a fraction of its own needs, and the garden's scale tells you something about predictable demand. Even the unexpected traveller is expected in bulk. When you return to the courtyard, you notice another rhythm that had escaped you: information. A runner stands by the gate, speaking to the Miri Sarai with the quick economy of someone who measures words against breath. You have heard of them, dak runners who carry messages from Sarai to Sarai across stretches where horses cost too much for the speed gained. He names a washed-out culvert 2 kos ahead, and lists, like a grocer, the stones shifted by the night's rain. He drinks thin buttermilk from a cup, wipes his mouth on his wrist, and moves on with the turn of someone who cannot afford to let muscles stiffen. You understand that the Serai is a node in a line of nodes, a way that rulers learned to let their will travel farther than their horses could gallop. Sher Shah Suri had hardened the road. Later emperors had dressed it with milestones, cost miners, and orders travelled along it like threads through a loom. You, with your mat and your bundle, are one more thread. You think of safety, which on the road is an arrangement rather than a mood. The Miri Sarai keeps 2 watchmen by day, and more by night. The boundary between courtyard and world is not policed by suspicion but by clarity. Rules are posted because posted rules are visible even to those who would prefer not to heed them. Beyond the walls, the Cotswolds men patrol stretches where trouble repeats itself. Inside, disputes are settled short of blows with reference to the ledger and the scale. The Miri Sarai can call for town help with a message carried faster than a cart can roll. You understand now why the bar at night sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. The gate is not closed against you, but for you. Breakfast is a series of small, forgiving tastes. You sit with a clay cup of hot milk diluted with water, a heel of bread baked on an upturned pot, and a pinch of salt between your fingers. Your neighbour, who sold charcoal yesterday and will buy rough jute today, offers a spoon of onion relish strong enough to wake your tongue. You think about how these flavours repeat across courtyards from Lahore to Patna, with local flour and local onions and the same logic. Feed simply, feed predictably, feed cheaply. A Sarai that tried for novelty would be a poor Sarai. Nearby, a group of Banjaras, bulk traders who move goods as a calling rather than a convenience, do their arithmetic out loud. They speak the language of sacks and days, how many bullocks for how many kos before hooves must rest, how many measures of salt can be loaded without having to buy fodder in a dearer market, how many coppers saved by camping outside the walls when the courtyard is crowded. You listen to their numbers as if they were a low song. You learn, without writing anything down, that the road is a calculator long before metal gears exist to mimic it. You wander to the gate to watch departures, because departures explain a Sarai as clearly as arrivals do. The Miri Sarai stops a cart whose axle sings too shrilly and sends it to the corner where a carpenter keeps a small box of chisels and wedges. The carpenter shaves dry wood thin, pushes a wedge into the hub, and quiets the wheel with a tap and a twist. He is not an employee of the Sarai in the modern sense. He is one more trader who has learned that the courtyard gives him customers if he keeps his bench neat and his charges modest. There are tiny economies nested inside larger ones. The Miri Sarai is shepherd to both. Your attention drifts upward to the parapet walk. A watchman leans there, staff resting on his shoulder, eyes half closed against the rising light. He marks time with stillness, not motion. In another age you might call him a security guard. Here he is a reminder that buildings themselves keep watch if people teach them how. By making sure the parapet has gaps to see through, the corners invite patrol, the lamps hang where they light faces, not feet. Architecture, you realise, is policy set in baked earth and lime. You return to your cell to pack. The mat rolls tight, the bundle takes its familiar shape. You have learned to put weight low and softness near the back of your neck. You pause, not from sentiment, but to check the niche for the small things people leave behind in rooms whose doors have no names. A nail, a folded scrap of paper, a bit of twine. Today there is nothing. That is the best ending for a stay. Take out what you brought in. Leave a room as neutral as the sky. Before you go, you walk one more slow circle and allow yourself to notice the details that yesterday hid under your first fatigue. The door lintels wear shallow crescents where the keyring has brushed them for years. The gate's lower edge is rimmed with a darker band because hands find that spot when pushing, even when a rope is fixed to pull. The garden's low fence has 2 places where baskets have rubbed a shine into the wood, one higher than the other, telling you about the heights of the carriers. If someone asked you to draw the sarai with your eyes closed, you would begin with these wear marks. They are the anatomy of use. You stop at the posted list of rules, scratched letters darkened with soot. The lines are both specific and modest. No fires in the inner arcade, no animals at the tank steps, no blades sharpened after nightfall. Sleepers may not be woken except by the Miri Sarai or his watchman. Accounts settled at dawn. You think of the words as pegs holding a tent in a steady wind. You could travel a long way under such a tent. When you reach the gate, the Mahara lifts his eyes and asks if you will note a change in your destination. You've been thinking of leaving the Grand Trunk Road straight assurance for a branch that slips toward a river market. He writes the new town in a smaller hand beside the first, a quiet amendment. You understand the courtesy. The ledger records intentions as well as facts, because on the road, intentions are themselves a kind of cargo that shifts with weather and news. If a relative fails to meet you at the next sarai, the ledger here will say, he meant to turn off earlier. In a world without wires, such sentences are wires. You step out at last onto the packed surface of the road. A cosminer stands to your left, its round body lime-washed, its top a shallow platform that collects bits of sky and dust. It is not grand, it is visible. That is its full dignity. You look back once more at the arch, now lit on its outer face by the low sun. The inner shade looks cooler than it felt in the afternoon. A sarai looks different each hour, not because it changes, but because the road's demands tilt your senses in different ways. A shepherd driving thin-tailed sheep pauses to ask the gatekeeper about a crossing where stones have shifted. The gatekeeper answers with a sentence that is both a direction and a reassurance. The bridge holds. Keep to the left where the wheel ruts are older. You file the phrase away. On the road, old is often the best map. As your feet find their morning pace, you keep turning the sarai over in your mind the way a trader turns a coin before he lets it go. You think about where this building came from. Not the bricks. They came from a kiln whose smoke has long cooled. But the decision to place it here and not 4 coes farther on. A ruler's order travelled down a chain of officers. A revenue official balanced taxes and allowances. Local masons chose spans they knew would not crack. A lime burner measured shell and wood by eye. A timer of pahars trained boys to repeat a watch's length with a drum or a conch. You realise the sarai is a braided result of skills and rules, none of which needs a name carved into a stone to be real. The inscription, if there ever was one, has long been nibbled away by soot and fingers. The proof survives in the way travellers sleep without fear. By mid-morning, the road is busy but unhurried. A palanquin moves at the speed of men who will bear it until the shade shortens. Its curtains are drawn, and you hear the faint jingle of a charm pinned to cloth to ward off the idea of illness. 2 soldiers ride with spears carried not as threats, but as announcements that someone with authority will want a quick answer to a simple question at the next town. A cluster of traders with indigo cakes wrapped in woven grass pass by, the blue smell trailing them like a polite ghost. Each group has spent nights in courtyards like the one you left. Each will spend nights in more. You think of those nights as stitches binding the fabric of the road. Without them, trade would fray, messages would snap, and a ruler's reach would shorten like wet cloth hung in sun. You find yourself wondering how many sarais you will meet if you keep to the road for a season, whether they will all feel as alike as cups from the same kiln, or whether certain courtyards will print themselves on your memory like seals on wax. Perhaps one will have a deeper well, another a rougher scale, a third a wall painted with old scenes scoured pale by years of smoke. The sameness will be the point, the differences will be a comfort, proof that real hands keep real places alive. By noon the heat stiffens the air enough that thought slows into simple shapes. You picture the Miri Sarai back there settling midday matters, a couple arguing over a lost strap, a groom returning a borrowed brush, a traveller asking for a message to be sent onward. The Mahara will fold the ledger closed until evening, placing a smooth stone on the cover to discourage flies. The Bandari will count cups and guess how many will chip before dusk. The watchman will shade his eyes and look down the road as if it were a sentence he learned long ago and likes to repeat without thinking about nouns and verbs. The sarai continues in its cycles, not because anyone loves cycles, but because cycles are the only way a road can be just to strangers. You look ahead and see a thin line of trees that hints at a watercourse, a bridge perhaps. The runner's warning about stones comes back to you. You will test each step with your eyes, not your toes. That is a lesson the Serai teaches without ever saying it. Prepare before you arrive, observe before you decide, settle before you sleep, pay before you leave. You smile at how those 4 verbs could govern more than journeys. When the road dips and the water shows, you find the bridge sound and the leftra older, exactly as the gatekeeper said. You cross without incident and pause on the far bank to look back out of habit, counting your good fortune not as luck but as the result of other people doing their work when you did not see them. You think of the boy with the sweeping brush, the groom with the grass broom, the carpenter with the wedges, the Mirror Sarai with his key. None asked you to remember them, and perhaps you will not, but the rhythm they keep is the rhythm that lets your feet press forward now without worry. You take a sip from your water skin and find it already warmer than you like. You think of the clay jar by the tank, of the way the leaf kept the mouth shaded, of the lichens that sometimes grow on lime-cool walls where splashes dry slowly. You miss the coolness for a moment and then accept the heat as the day's condition. The road does not offer comfort at noon. It balances the comfort of last night with the knowledge that another courtyard is ahead if you pace yourself. A cart overtakes you slowly, the driver clucking once with his tongue to announce his approach. You step to the side and he nods, an economy of gratitude you have seen in 100 forms since you first set out. On the cart, tied down with ropes that have been spliced so often they look like braids, lies a stack of roof tiles with a terracotta blush. Perhaps they are destined for a Sarai's repair, perhaps not. You're struck by the thought that materials move between courtyards, just as recipes and rules do. The road is not only a line along which goods pass, it is a long workshop where the design for a hinge or a method for keeping lamp smoke from blackening a niche can travel farther than a mason ever will. By late afternoon you will see the next Sarai's outline, low, square, familiar, and you will feel the small lift inside you that comes from recognizing a shape that promises the same sequence of acts. Announce, be counted, water the animals, secure a cell, light a lamp, cook a simple pot, sleep. You realize that this predictability is the road's greatest kindness and its greatest invention. Empires boast of palaces, but the courtyards that let strangers rest are what keep maps from being lies. As the path begins a gentle rise, you pause and look back one more time in the direction of the place you left. You cannot see its walls now, but you can almost hear the soft knock the Mirror Sarai gives the gate at dusk, testing the bar before the night watch begins. You wonder, not sentimentally but practically, how long this system will hold. Roads change when rulers change, when revenue habits shift, when new forms of carriage challenge old. Will the Sarai deepen its rut in the world with each passing decade? Or will it one day be a broken rectangle where goats graze and shepherds waver under the shade? You do not know. For now it works, and that is the entire meaning of a road. Your feet find the evening pace without instruction. A Kos miner ahead leans a degree from plum, lime wash chalking your fingers when you touch it. Someone long ago decided how far apart these markers should stand, and men hauled water and lime and brick to set them up, and then left them to the weather and the glances of travellers like you. You try to imagine the meeting where the decision was made. How far apart? How high? How visible in rain? You cannot hear the voices, but you can see their answer in the cylinder of brick that has resisted sun and monsoon and the push of roots. The light mellows, the air loosens its grip. You think again of the ledger and the question that tugged you as you fell asleep. Who records the Sarai itself? You know that chronicles sometimes mention a foundation by a king or a governor, and that revenue papers talk about stipends and repairs, yet the daily kindnesses, the rules enforced without anger, the lampwick trimmed at the right moment, these usually do not find ink. Perhaps the Sarai is recorded in the way the road does not break, in the number of journeys that end as planned, in the quiet shrug of a trader who did not have to sleep in a ditch. The record might be the absence of stories about disaster. You will reach the next courtyard by dusk if the road does not invent a delay. You feel the calculation like a simple instrument in your chest. So many ko's, such gradients, such heat. You know what you pay. You know where you will set your mat. You know how the bar will sound against the gate. The day offers you the answer to a question you did not know you were asking when you first left home. What holds a vast place together without making it feel like a cage? as the sun slides behind a line of trees and the shadow of the next sarai's parapet reaches a little way down the road like a welcoming sleeve. You breathe out, long and even, part habit, part gratitude. You think one last practical thought before the evening's work of arrival begins. If the road's memory is written in ledgers and in ruts, what memory will you leave behind that could be useful to someone who will never learn your name? If one evening a traveller pauses at a sarai you will never see, and drinks from a jar kept cool by a leaf because someone told the Pandari that trick from a place 2 weeks west, could that small coolness be the only proof that your journey too has added something to the road? Toward dusk, when the sky is the colour of cooled copper and the day's last flies hover like spent thoughts, you step into another sarai whose outline is comfortingly familiar. Square courtyard, arched cells, a tank hushed at the centre. The routine of arrival is already stitched into you. Announce yourself, be counted, count your coins, and yet each place teaches a fresh version of the same lesson. You pass beneath the gate and feel the small draft that announces enclosure, not confinement but shelter. The difference is in the intention of the bar that will fall after dark. Here the gate bench is tended by a younger muharrir than yesterday's, his reed pen quick, his wrists spattered with old ink freckles that will never wash off. He asks the same questions in a different cadence. You offer your pass. He heats a seal gently above the lamp to soften the last smear of soot, presses it again, and writes your name where the margin invites new lines. He does not look at your face as much as he listens to the answers. On the road, a steady voice is a kind of letter. The Miri Sarai is an older woman this time, thin, direct, with a grey scarf wound at the nape as if to keep thought from straying. Her keyring hangs from a loop sewn into the end of her sash, and when she walks the iron rings knock lightly like a measured cough. She sets you to a cell near the inner corner where the night wind will not blow across your mat. You will sleep, she says, not as a blessing but as a fact arranged by walls and the habits that maintain them. You water yourself and then watch the animals settle. The stable boy here sings under his breath, a flat tune of 3 notes repeated without impatience, and his brush is a bundle of reed stems bound with twine. He moves it in short, respectful strokes along the camel's flank, as if writing a sentence that will flake away by morning but still matters tonight. The trough is the same shape as yesterday's, but its lip is rounded smooth by more hands or harder water. When a bucket strikes it, the sound is hollower, as if this sarai keeps its echoes nearer to itself. Food begins, clay lids lift. A spice you did not taste yesterday, asafoetida, sharp and almost sweet in its insistence, passes through the courtyard and then becomes part of the air you no longer notice. A boy brings a stack of coarse chapatis from a communal griddle and walks like a messenger delivering identical letters to various doors. He is barefoot, and the soles of his feet are darker than his hands, proof that in certain kinds of work the ground writes itself onto the body more deeply than ink. You're sitting with your cup and your bowl when the incident begins, not a drama fashioned for a tale, but the sort of hinge that shows what a sarai is made to. A trader's bundle has gone missing from the platform near the tank. He discovers the absence with the quiet shock of someone who prefers to count twice before speaking once. The bundle is not large, coarse cloth tied with blue string, but the voice that names it carries careful value. Dyed skeins that must not be wet, thread counted in hanks, a small margin of profit measured in the difference between one town's price and the next. He says he left it just here, just now, and his hand makes a circle on the air that tries to enclose the moment, to keep it from slipping further away. The courtyard stills in the particular way a place stills when it decides to help rather than stare. The Miri Sarai does not raise her voice. She lifts one hand and points, and the small machinery of order starts to turn. A watchman closes the postern and stands there, not menacingly, but like a cork placed in a bottle. The Mahara folds the ledger open to the page where arrivals are recorded. The Bandari sets his cup stack down and looks around the rims as if he expects to see a clue reflected inside the clay. You register the difference between suspicion and procedure. Here, procedure goes first. The Miri Sarai asks for the trader's name. The Mahara reads it back from the page, then reads the entries nearest to it. A bullock driver with a rent axle, 2 pilgrims, a coppersmith travelling with his apprentice, a woman carrying news to her married daughter in the next town. She does not summon them by accusation. She invites them by the logic of adjacency. Those who arrived within a quarter hour, she says, and the phrase is polite mathematics. They gather, some wiping hands, some embarrassed to be named by the clock, and stand in a crooked circle that stops short of closing. The Narration has the watchman fetch a scale from the niche by the mosque. It is the same beam and pan you noticed last night's dawn. She hangs it on a hook set into the arcade post and weighs nothing first. Empty pans hanging equal, the metal describing a level from which deviations will be meaningful. She asks the trader to describe the bundle twice, what it contains, how it is tied, its weight, to the nearest handful of grain, as she puts it, and you understand the metaphor not as poetry but as instruction. A thought passes through your mind. This would be an easy hour for anger. The trader could spit, the watchman could sneer, the courtyard could divide itself into the righteous and the accused. Instead, the Narration divides it by function. She asks each of the newly arrived to place their bundles, if any, on the platform by the scale. A boy is sent for a shallow tub and a towel. The Narration plucks a thread from the trader's cuff and lays it on the pan to demonstrate lightness, then places a small stone from the tank's edge to show weight, talking all the while as someone who teaches because teaching is the quickest way to keep pride from shouting. The coppersmith's apprentice looks most frightened, not because he has done anything but because apprentices live close to punishment even when innocent. His master puts a hand behind his neck and says too loudly, "We have our own bundle." It is a sack that clinks, scraps and odds, respectable metal on its way to be recast. The pelting sound as it slides on the platform is proof against accusation. The pilgrims have nothing but cloth shoulder bags that smell of lamp smoke and cardamom. The bullock driver's gear is a scatter of hemp cords and wedges. The woman with news carries a basket fronted by an old shawl. Beneath it are sweets wrapped in leaf for her daughter's children. And her outrage at having to show them is not humiliation but a grandmother's arithmetic. The sweets must survive the road. Then a boy emerges from the shadow by the stable with a bundle tied in blue string. He holds it in both hands as if it might leak. His eyes are averted in the particular way that announces not theft but the knowledge of a rule he has broken at one remove. "It was by the tank," he says. "I brought it out of the way of the water because a man was washing a pot and splashing." The Narration does not praise him and does not scold him. She nods toward the scale. The bundle rests on the pan. The beam dips into a crisp fact. The trader's chest, careful, measured, loosens its held breath. The boy's explanation is sensible and insufficient. Sensible because threads should not drink from a tank. Insufficient because bundles should not move without their owner. The Narration settles it without ceremony. She has the Muharir write a small note in the ledger margin. Bundle moved from platform to stable by boy for dryness. She tells the boy to fetch a reed and copy the same in a second book that stays near the gate, a rough log for the watchman's reference. When the same thing happens twice, she says, it becomes a pattern. We must choose the pattern. The trader counts the hanks, finds them all, and then offers a bent copper to the boy, thanks measured so that it does not buy a habit. The boy looks at the Narration. She nods once. The copper travels from hand to hand. The courtyard exhales. You study the faces as calm returns. Suspicion has not disappeared. It has been converted into description and paper. The scale is unhooked and hung back in its niche. The watchman opens the postern a hand's breadth to let in air, and with that small opening the Sarai's mood shifts again into evening. You realise how much of the road's peace depends on this kind of choreography, the quick deployment of instruments and memory, the refusal to hurry anger. Empires often picture themselves as eagles. You see now that sometimes they survive because someone at the right hour is a scale. Lamps move toward their places, alcove, gate bench, in a corner where a cracked flagstone has taught generations to step lightly. The call to prayer unknots the chatter into a more spacious silence. A man with a sore ankle washes carefully at the tank step, slapping water against skin as if persuasion could accelerate healing. The Bandari's helper counts clay cups by tapping them together. Sound, sound, sound. Then a dull chink, one cracked. He sets it aside for a poor traveller who will accept a flawed rim rather than go thirsty. The Narration takes one slow round of the courtyard as if to release any remaining tightness from the incident, then begins the usual dusk inspection. Bolts, bar, the look of the ladder to the parapet, the slack or strain of the rope that hoists the gate lamp. Only when the lamps are steady does new information arrive, carried this time not by a runner on foot but by a rider with a thin horse and a rope-wrapped packet behind his saddle. He does not dismount fully. He leans and speaks to the gate bench in a voice pitched to be memorised, not admired. A culvert 2 goes west has sagged further since morning. The road is passable but uneasy. Carts should be walked and not ridden over the shallow dip. It is nothing that will make a chronicle, but it is the kind of instruction that prevents a day from becoming a tale of loss. The Mahara copies the news onto a small board rubbed with charcoal and hangs it by the gate for those who cannot read but can have it read to them. A line of script becomes a line of footsteps that will slow at the right hollow. Administration is sometimes only this, a sentence transformed into safety. Later, as the darkness deepens into its middle thickness, a small delegation arrives from the town. A Cotswolds man, a mason, and a youth with a wrapped parcel. They stand just inside the gate, dust on their hems, and the Narration meets them with her key still looped at her sash. The mason has come to look at a crack that has opened over the postern arch. Lime will be needed and brick. The youth brings the receipt for last month's repair to the stable wall. The Cotswolds man wants to know if the road officer's message about the culvert has come this far, and if any carts have reported trouble since the heat bled from the afternoon. The conversation is unhurried, but not slow. Words placed like bricks hold better. The Narration asks the mason to mark the crack with a line of soot, so its growth can be measured at dawn. You feel a professional satisfaction at the idea that even a fracture can be given a schedule. When the postern has swallowed the last town men and the courtyard is whole again, the night settles into its watch rhythm. Someone dreams loudly, someone's lamp gutters and is trimmed by a neighbour who wakes without annoyance and sleeps again. A dog outside the wall rehearses the same bark 3 times to tell itself a story about its own courage. You lie on your mat and think not of the missing bundle anymore, but of the 2 books in which its brief disappearance now lives, the ledger and the watchlog. It is hard to name mercy when it wears ordinary clothes, but you suspect that is what these books are. Not forgivers of sin, preventers of anger. You will leave in the morning. You know this because the road has taught you to hear your own decisions right before you declare them. Sleep takes the decision, pins it like a page between 2 others, and returns it to you unrumpled at first light. You wake and find the courtyard damp and honest looking, the stone edges darkened with dew. The boy with the brush sweeps again, laying out the day's neatness like a mat for everyone to step onto. You roll your bedding into its travelling shape. Your hands perform the knots without your mind needing to tell them which way the cord must pass under itself to hold. Departure is not different here, only narrower. The gate bench tilts the ledger for the morning angle. The Mughal licks the tip of his reed and redarkens a thin patch in his nib. You pay what you owe: room, wood, a pinch of salt bought last night, stable space. The Narration checks the carpenter's wedge in the right-hand hub of a cart axle and gives it a single confirming tap. She asks the coppersmith to look at a bent latch. He will do it this afternoon, he says, and she writes a short note on a sliver of paper. Latch to be straightened, no charge, and folds it so that the words face in. You think again how 1,000 little papers keep a large place legible. At the gate you hesitate for a reason that does not feel like sentiment. You ask the Narration where her keys came from. It is a clumsy question, but she understands it. From the last keeper, she says. He died. His son keeps goats and does not like walls. I kept the job because I like rules that are not cruel. She does not say this to be admired. She says it to complete a record in your head that began with the sound of iron knocking quietly against a sash. You nod. She nods. The bar lifts with the same sound you heard in yesterday's courtyard and in courtyards before that. Wood clearing wood, intention clearing the day. The road tastes similar to yesterday. Dust as flour, sun as a patient hand on your shoulder. But the morning carries a sharper rumour. Travellers coming the other way speak of new work on the cos miners, of lime sacks near milestones and men scraping lichens with curved knives to make surfaces bright again. An order, someone says, and shrugs. An order is a story with the verbs already chosen. You wonder if the men who climb the miners and rub the surfaces white think of the travellers who will read the renewed lightness as distance made visible. You wonder if they care. It is not necessary that they care. It is sufficient that they make the markers catch dawn. By late morning, the road sidles along a low ridge where a stand of kikar trees throws a net of shade wider than their trunks can justify. There, a small shrine sits like a forgetful stone, no larger than 2 hands, outstretched, a smear of vermilion on its face, a handful of marigold petals made brittle by sun. You rest at the edge of the shade and read the day through your feet. An ache under the second toe means your sandal strap will need a new hole soon. A softness in the calf means yesterday's rise was steeper than your eye admitted. A dryness at the back of the tongue means you drank less at dawn than you told yourself you did. On the road, the body is itself a ledger. Your job is to read it while the entries are still legible. When the next sarai comes into view in the afternoon haze, lime-washed, square, modest, you feel the now familiar undramatic lift of recognition. You will enter, be counted, water the animals, find a cell. Somewhere inside a boy will be sweeping, a watchman will be marking time like a sculpture that occasionally taps stone, a bandari will be sorting cups by sound, a ledgerman will be rubbing new ink into an old pen, and a miri sarai, man or woman, will be measuring the day not by what happened, but by what was kept from happening. You understand now what the road has been telling you in the plainest possible words, that a civilization is the art of making ordinary nights safe for strangers, and you feel the impulse, oddly practical, to record this in a place that will outlast your memory. You cannot build a miner, you cannot issue an order, you can suggest a habit. So that evening, when you sit near the tank and watch lamps find their final heights on their wicks, you show the bandari the trick of the leaf on the jar's mouth if he does not already know it. He does, of course, he learned it from a traveller last cold season, and he grins at you as if to say that news travels as surely as messages, and comfort moves along the road under no one's seal. It might be enough, not heroic enough, but sufficient enough. On a road where ledgers remember names and scales keep tempers straight, a habit that keeps water cooler by an hour is not small. It is the difference between sleeping and sleeping well, between being only carried by the road and being helped along by it. At last the bar falls, wood on wood, an instrument closing, and you lie in your cell with the ordinary satisfaction of someone who has done nothing famous, and yet kept his bargain with the day. You think of the incident with the bundle, and the way the sarai converted a minute of fear into 2 sentences and 2 books. You think of the culvert and the charcoal board that told carts to walk, not ride. You think of keys handed from a dead keeper to a living one who likes rules that are not cruel. You smile, and the smile is not pious. It is relief in its least dramatic form. You close your eyes, and the courtyard gathers its sounds into a blanket. A tether rope creaks. A lamp glass ticks as it warms. Someone's breath whistles. Somewhere a cup chips and is placed carefully with the cracked ones for tomorrow's poor traveller. The sarai puts its instruments away inside the ears of those who sleep. The watchman's staff leans against the parapet. The scale hangs again in its niche, empty and honest. The ledger lies with its smooth stone on the cover to keep the night from turning the page with idle wind. This is the road's lullaby, not words, arrangements. Before sleep takes you, you return, as minds do, to a question that is larger than your mat and smaller than an empire. Roads fold, empires change their colours, ledgers mildew and are copied into other ledgers. Cost miners lean a degree or 2 before someone orders lime to brighten them, or goats find welcome shade against their bases for 100 summers. What remains? Perhaps only the habit of caring for strangers in structures built for passage. Perhaps this habit moves forward even when names do not. Perhaps the modern traveller who tells time by a machine and pays a clerk in paper money is still, without knowing it, inheriting the touch of a watchman's staff on a gate bar and the memory of a miri sarai who knew how to stop anger with a scale. If every gate bar that fell in the evening wrote a soft line across the map, would we discover that the true shape of a country is not its borders, but the nightly promise it keeps to those who are only passing through? Along the trunk road, cost miners rise like milestones of breath. Pehas ring from sarais. Travellers pace daylight, measuring distance by shadows, time by drums. You notice the Kho's miner before you notice the village. It rises from the roadside like a blunt finger of brick and lime, a cylinder that has learned how to hold the sun. No inscription announces it, no statue crowns it. It is a marker made for people who need facts, not speeches. How far you have come, how far you have to go. You put your palm on its lime-washed skin and feel a coolness that outlasts the hour. Even in heat, the mina remembers dawn. You're still learning the grammar of these pillars. They stand at intervals that your body can feel but cannot quite recite. Roughly a cos apart, an old measure whose length has wandered a little across centuries and provinces, but which the road insists on translating into the day's logic. A cos is long enough to persuade you to rest and short enough to keep you from calling it the end. Between two miners lies a swallow of water, a tightening of a sandal strap, the small conversation you have with your own feet. You do not need perfect agreement about a cos's length to agree that it is the unit by which a traveller keeps his promises. You sit in the strip of shade on the miner's east side and let your breath settle into the reliable shape it knows after exertion. From here, you can see what the pillar is made of. Thick courses of brick laid in a simple bond, smoothed with lime plaster, patched where the weather has peeled away a hand's span of skin. The bottom is surrounded by a stony skirt of trampled earth and unremarkable offerings. A string once, wound around the base that has since surrendered to sun, a splash of vermilion from a passing hand, a coin pressed into a crack and then forgotten. The pillar does not ask to be worshipped, it asks to be seen. A bullock cart creaks toward you and pauses. The carter lets the animals breathe and strokes the strap that crosses the withers, a familiar gesture that reassures more than it repairs. He squints up at the miner as if it were a clock. In a sense, it is. It measures the day by what is possible between towers. If you started at first light and rest briefly at each stone cylinder, you can predict, even without owning a sundial, when you will reach a sarai, a ferry, a fork. If you're a messenger, you will count miners like beats and feel their rhythm dictate your pace. 3 before the heat, 2 after, 1 more by dusk if the road is honest. The road is honest when it tells you what you can bear. You stand and read the world in the way this miner directs you to read it. Outward along the line of its companions, inward along the line of your own breath. Beyond the pale cloud of dust, the next pillar is a smudge of brightness. Beyond that, another. And beyond that, a rumour you're willing to trust because someone took trouble to make trustable things. Rulers ordered these markers. Sher Shah Suri hardened the road with sarais and milestones. Later emperors kept the habit because empires cannot move if they do not first learn to count. Yet the pillar is as local as the hands that mixed lime with sand, the boys who hauled water, the mason who chose how thick to make the coat so the rain would not reach the bricks in the first monsoon. You start walking again and let distance and time braid themselves the old way. Kos and Pehar. The Pehar tells you when, the Kos tells you how far. 4 Pehars make a day's light, 4 make the night, 8 watches in all. If you stay long enough in the old rhythm, you can feel them pass the way a sleeper feels a neighbour turning on a shared mat. Dawn is not a number. It is the softest Pahar's end. Noon is not a word. It is the moment when shade fits itself exactly to the base of a pillar. The watch changes when the sound of the world changes. Birds mutter differently. Wheels take longer to settle into ruts. Watchmen at Sarai shift the staff to the other hand and tap the ground before they remember they have already done so. At a curve where kikar trees lean their thorny shadows across the surface of the road, you meet a group of postal runners, dak men, moving like a single thought broken into legs. They are barefooted, their ankles beaded with dust. Each carries a staff and a small bag wrapped in oilcloth and tied with the kind of knot that cannot be opened casually. They do not stop, but one glances at the miner and his expression adjusts, relief slotted into resolve, as if counting silently. 3 more pillars to the relay point, 2 before the stream. You realise that the miner does not belong to anyone in particular. It belongs to itineraries. A shepherd asks you from the side of the road whether the Nexcus miner stands near a well or near the tamarind with the scar. You tell him the well's lip is cracked on the north side, that a string hangs from a hook there because a woman tore her rope last week. He nods as though you have recited a line of scripture. For him, the pillar is not simply a measure. It is a landmark that indexes the lived geography, the places where shade is honest, where dogs do not bark at night, where the soil gives way beneath a wheel after rain. For the shepherd, a kos is not a number, but a memory stitched to a tree, a stone, a rumour of water. By mid-morning the road grows louder with loose speech. Traders with wrapped indigo cakes and bundles of cotton talk in arithmetic. How many cows before fodder grows cheaper? How many pahars to time a halt so that animals feed when the sun has decided not to argue? You listen to their sums. They treat the day like a ledger drawn down the page. Pehar marks across the top, Kos marks along the side, and they fill cells with decisions. They have no graph paper, but their faces show the satisfaction of a line that balances. You eat at the base of another mina, a cracked chapati folded around the onion and a whisper of salt. The lime dust smears your fingers, and you think of the men who lime wash these towers after the rains. A man on a ladder will scrape the dead scales where damp has bubbled the coat, slap a new mixture on with a kind of blunt tenderness, smooth it with a trowel that remembers 100 such gestures. He might not know the names of kings. He will know whether the sand was taken from a river bend or a dry stream bed. His decision will hold the next season's distance and place. The sun climbs, shadows tighten. The world rearranges itself to survive the middle day. A Kos miner in this light throws a narrow blade of shade that cuts your fatigue into a manageable piece. You stand inside it and feel the temperature drop just enough to make the next stretch possible. The pillar does not cool the air, it cools your decision. You move on. Near noon you pass a smaller marker. Nothing like a miner, only a stone with a cross-hatched face half sunk in the verge. A boy taps it with his staff as he walks, counting aloud. Not every stretch is dressed with towers. Where brick and lime cost too much in a difficult year, stones do the work. The principle does not change. Make distance visible, make time legible. Where pillars stand, messages move safely. Where they fall, news phrase. At the lip of a shallow culvert, you find a scribble of charcoal on a board propped against a post. Carts to be walked, not ridden. The dip has softened since last rain. The board is an errand of kindness from a sarai you have not yet reached. Someone wrote it at dawn after the night watch told the Miri sarai that a wheel had sunk, and a driver cursed and no one was hurt because someone shouted in time. You feel protected by people you do not know. You slow your step without resentment. There is a pahar to keep, not a race to win. By early afternoon the pahar is stingy, asking you to spend your strength carefully. You practice the small arithmetics the road teaches. 30 steps in shade, drink. 50 in sun, breathe deeper. Touch the mina with the left palm now and with the right at the next. Because alternating attention keeps boredom from turning foolish. A rider passes at a canter, horse ribs flexing, head low. He is not a courier. He wears no road officer's insignia. He glances at the pillar too, and you see a faint look of apology cross his face, as if he knows speed is a kind of theft from the ordinary grammar of the road, and feels obliged to pay back a nod. The afternoon offers one of its honest gifts, wind. Dust wakes, and with it a memory embedded in lime. You smell the faint sour of old rain trapped in plaster. The chalky sweetness of crushed shell if the lime was made that way. The ghost of smoke where someone lit a lamp against the mina in last year's festival. The pillar does not speak, but it exhales. You breathe with it and understand another of its uses that never appears on a revenue paper. Reassurance. Even the smell of distance can be domesticated. A Kos, later you reach a place where two branches of the road debate. The miner stands between them like an umpire who will not offer opinions. Travellers consult it as if it could answer, and perhaps it already has. The pillar's base is scuffed more deeply on one side. The lime on the east face is cleaner, washed by morning storms. Small cups for offerings are clustered on the side that leads toward a shrine 2 watches away. The miner keeps no diary, it wears evidence. You read it and choose the branch that most feet have trusted this month. Geography is a pole without ink. As the day leans toward evening, you begin listening for time instead of looking for it. The pihar's end is announced by things that have no wish to be clocks. A charpoy being dragged across a courtyard, the gentler sound of a door-bar tested once before dusk, a conch blown from a temple whose priest refuses to count but cannot avoid marking watches. When you sight the next Kosmina, the last before the Sarai, you find 2 boys climbing it with a rope looped around its belly. They are not vandals. They are apprentices sent by a mason to check the coat for blisters. One thumps the plaster lightly with the heel of his palm. The other laughs when a swallow flares from a small pocket where it has tried to build. The boys will scrape tomorrow at dawn when the plaster is cooler and more honest. Today, they are learning what a hollow sounds like. You are pleased that someone is teaching them to hear. You imagine making your last stretch, how an officer would have explained this system to a new subordinate in some previous century. Place pillars a coss apart, lime wash them after rain, assign men to check them, keep a list in the town, make sure the Sarai's watchman notes if anyone chips at the base to grind lime for their own house. Set the rule and then make it routine. Change the world by making maintenance a habit. You smile because the explanation is both grand and dull, the two qualities that hold an empire together long after banners have faded. The Sarai appears with the light behind it, walls gilded the colour of cooling brass. You register the sequence you have learned to love because it does not require new thought. Gate, bench, ledger, water, hearth, mat. But before you pass under the arch, you stop at the Kos Minor that keeps company with this courtyard, and you thank it with a palm pressed flat against its side. The habit is not superstition, it is accounting. You owe the pillar the knowledge of how you spent the day. Inside, the courtyard collects you, the Miri Sarai, a man with a careful beard and the look of someone who has spent years persuading wooden bars to close without tantrum, accepts your pass, notes your animals, none. Asks the question that registers you deeper than your name. How many watches did you keep today? You answer, 2 before noon, 2 after. He nods as if you have reported the weather for the sake of tomorrow's departures. He gestures to the Mahara, who writes your name and then, in a narrow margin, a tiny mark that tells him how many pairs most travellers of your strength can be expected to hold to tomorrow, if the road keeps its promises. Only then do you notice the board by the gate, on which someone has chalked a plan for repairs. Lime for the pillar, 2 coes west, cracked at the base, a request to the town store for shell to burn, a note that says, in a line too modest to be remembered by anyone but you, that the boys who climbed the tower at dusk will return at dawn with knives bent for scraping, and a cloth bag to catch the flakes so they do not whiten the verge for goats to lick. The plan is a poem written for no one. It will keep people safer than a song. You rinse your hands at the tank, heat a small pot, and eat the same forgiving food that 1,000 courtyards lean on when they have no time for invention. Lentils that no longer insist on being counted as individuals, a heel of bread, a spoon of pickle bright enough to trick the tongue into gratitude. The night gathers into the sort of quiet that proves nothing heroic happened. Lamps stare like patient eyes. A man with a hoarse cough lies down on his side so the sound will disturb fewer people. His neighbour shifts his mat without being asked. 2 watchmen change places, one takes the parapet, the other the postern. Both tap the stone gently, an oath kept to habit rather than to law. Your body thinks it could stay awake and then mercifully forgets its pride. From your cell you see, through the doorway's angle, the near edge of the gate and the far edge of the minor against a sky the colour of ash rinsed once, with milk. The pillar looks closer in darkness, as if distance itself rests at night. You wonder how many watches of how many nights have been measured by people using that dull, faithful cylinder as a second moon. You lie back on your mat and let the day sort itself into its honest pieces, minor, coarse, pihar, bar, lamp, ledger. The arrangement is plain enough to sing you to sleep. It is not the only way to counter life, but tonight it is the one you trust. And as your thoughts grow lighter than the air that moves through the courtyard, a last sensible question steadies itself at the doorway of sleep. If a road teaches people to share a common hour by pihars and a common distance by pillars, what happens when a new habit, another measure, another clock, arrives and asks them to keep time differently? Will the old rhythm survive inside the new, or will the pillars and watches become fossils that only scholars remember? You rise before the light has chosen a colour and discover that you are already keeping time the way the road prefers, by actions that recur more reliably than any clock. You pack the mat, wet the face, knot the strap, and step out just as the watch on the parapet changes hands. No bell tells you this. A staff taps twice on stone, and the rhythm is older than the building. You have begun to think in pahars without declaring it to yourself. A watch ends when a human pattern repeats. Sweep, tap, unbar, fold, pour, count. You set out toward a long level run where the pillars keep you company. Here the Coes miners feel closer together, though the measure on paper has not changed. Familiarity compresses distance. You have learned a traveller's superstition that is not quite superstition at all, that a pillar seen at the right moment steadies the day more than a full bag of food. You touch the lime with your palm and feel the chalk come off on your skin. You do not wipe it away. The road has signed your hand. The signature means carry on. You tell yourself you are merely moving through a landscape of markers, But by mid-morning you are reading a system that took centuries to teach itself to you. The miners are not decorations. They are the skeleton of a policy. The Paher is not a story told around fires. It is the schedule of a civilization that prefers to divide the world into 8 careful moods. You had heard the story before, that Sher Shah Suri, ruling for a brief busy span in the 16th century, forced a line into the subcontinent's middle and called it a road, hardening the track with resting places and planting shade where shade would matter at noon. He did other things: coins, revenue, men who understood that the business of rule is to prevent trouble from needing a name. But the road is the thing you touch each day. After him, emperors who preferred permanence to speed added habits to his haste. The pillars you lean against are latecomers to the idea. Jahangir and Shah Jahan took a ruler's desire for reach and translated it into cylinders of lime and brick. A cos apart, roughly, along the long spine from Agra to Lahore, and on other roads when coffers permitted. The inscription that matters is the interval. You do not need a chronicle to feel the logic. You watch the morning gather and understand the two halves of the system, distance and duration, settle their partnership in your bones. A cos is a place you can point to. A peher is a way to behave until the lamp is lit, or the shade lies in a certain shape. A pillar is a unit of where. A watch is a unit of when. Between the two, carts arrive without drama, runners exchange their loads without panic, and the gate bar drops each evening not as a threat but as a punctuation mark in a sentence the whole road is writing. You start counting, and your mind, trained by ledgers you have glimpsed at Serres, makes a quiet table without paper. In the first bahar of daylight you can cover perhaps 3 kos if the animals are fresh and the road was swept of last week's mistakes. If you are on foot, 1.5 with a pause to remember why the second sandal strap always slips on damp mornings. In the last bahar of afternoon, when the road has warmed and cooled and the dust has decided to cling instead of sting, you can take 1 kos more without turning dinner into a punishment. The numbers can be quarrelled with by scholars, but your body does not argue. It calms itself along the columns it has made. The watch keeps you honest because the watch is built from phenomena that do not care if you notice them. How long a pot takes to boil on a small flame. How far the shade of a kos miner's base travels in the hour when the sun is stepping down from its pride. How much oil disappears from a lamp wick in the quarter of the night that ends with the second call to prayer. The old men of towns will tell you, if you ask, that a pahar is 3 hours. The truth is tidier on the tongue than in the sky. In the monsoon, the day's pahars hunch together like men under one cloth. In winter, they stretch out, lean-bodied, while the night sits heavy. The road allows such elasticity because the road cares about predictability, not uniformity. Once, near a town that sits proud on a river bend, you pause at a square platform where someone has set a bowl with a slow leak, an old water clock improvised, the bowl's tip showing a long scratch where many thumbs have steadied it. The bowl does not set the watch. It reminds the watchman when the watch should change. In cities, the Cotswolds men use drums and conchis from booths at the cross streets. Along the road, the signal is more local. A staff on wood, a lamp snuffed and relit, a horn that carries better at dawn than at dusk. You realise why your breathing found its habits before your mind did. The body can keep time on this road without a device. You fall in alongside a postal runner for half a kos, and the shade allows 2 men to move at one pace. He carries a baton, cracked from many grips and a packet tied with waxed thread. He speaks in sentences clipped to the length of his breath. He measures his day differently from you. The road's grammar is the same, but his script is speed. 2 pahars to the next relay if the culvert holds, he says, as if reciting a prayer that needs only punctual devotion, not pleading. He will run, not because he likes running, but because someone in a city you will never see believes that a ruler's will should cross a province inside one daylight. He knows the pillars as intimately as a monk knows his beads. He will not touch them. He will count them with his eyes. You part where the next miner throws a blade of shadow that you can tuck yourself into for a moment. There, under a skin of a lime that still remembers last year's rain, a mason has scratched a small mark, no bigger than the grain inside a fig. You've begun to notice these marks, half alphabet, half blessing, signs that a particular hand is responsible for the patch of plaster where your shoulder now rests. Responsibility must leave traces or it tends to evaporate. The pillar is not anonymous, it is impersonally personal, an odd accurate phrase that only the road could teach. By noon, you have earned a halt. A tamarind on a low mound casts a net of shade over a half-dry tank, and a woman at the lip rinses a small copper pot with a motion that might be called pahari. A hillside economy, everything tilted and efficient. She has walked from the last village and will reach a serai by evening, but the road has its own places to pause, not all of them walled. She asks without fuss if you know how far to the next Kos miner. A pair and a little, you say, holding up 3 fingers and folding one, a gesture that makes sense to the body even when the mind wants arithmetic. She nods, and speaks a truth as practical as salt. If I reach the pillar before the last watch, I will sleep. She does not mean she will lie down by the miner. She means the pillar will tell her whether the day is an ally or an argument. You have heard quibbles about the length of a kos. In some districts men say 2, in others 2.5, and in places where the land sounds different under wheels they will swear to 3. You do not care to settle the debate. The pillar speaks one language to everyone. Here is a unit you can plan around. That is enough for trade, for messages, for the slow, ordinary work of empire. The surveyor's rod will come in a later century and impose an exactness that has its own dignity. But on the road you walk now, the pillar's promise, to be roughly where it should be, predictably, turns the landscape from hazard into habit. As the day tips, you find another rhythm that pairs happily with the miners and the watchers, the rest points of animals. Oxen prefer to chew without moving in the second par after noon. Camels kneel with a theatrical sigh, as if to remind men that loads do not levitate. Horses grow eloquent in their ears when the light turns old. The pillars allow their masters to time those instincts. We will eat at the 3rd, a carter says to his boy, meaning the 3rd miner after the heat drops, and the boy does not ask him to count the hours. Hours would not help. Pillars will. You pass a stone where someone, years ago, scrawled a number in a charcoal that has since become part of the surface. Men argue about whether the number declared the kos or the count of lamps that should be lit before a shrine. Women ignore the quarrel and look at the way the light lies on the path in the last pahar before dusk. You smile because the road's intelligence is quietly democratic. It lets the useful habit win the day, while the dispute dozes under a thin dust. There is more mercy in practice than in victory. At a junction, a small group of banjaras sit with their backs to a miner and lay out measures of salt on a cloth. Their trade runs on bulk, but their decisions run on watches. If we take the lower road, 2 pahars with water. If the upper, 1 pahar and a quarter with none. They weigh the salt not in scales but in memory. The lick of animals at noon, the sting of sweat in eyes when the wind comes from the west. The pillar behind them is both landmark and instrument. Its base has a habit of shade that tells them how much bitterness to carry in skins for the bodies that must pull weight the next 4 kos. You see that the miner is a quiet accountant for people who do not keep paper books. When the evening thickens and the road acquires that softened sound that says kitchens are getting their work in order, you enter a sarai to find a wall chart near the gate. A board rubbed smooth with lamp soot, letters scratched in with a nail, a diagram of intention. The Miri Sarai has had the Mahara copy a schedule of watches for the season. Night divided into 4 pahars, each with 2 lamp checks. Day divided into 4 more, each with an inspection of the gate latch and the stables. A second column lists distances to the next 3 pillars and the next 2 ferries. No one salutes the board. People consult it the way they consult the sky when they want to know if tomorrow will be kind. You like the modesty of it. Nothing about kings, everything about intervals. After the meal you sit by the gate and ask the watchman, who smells faintly of lamp oil and brick dust, how he learned to keep pahars so evenly. He shrugs. At first you count sons, he says, meaning boys running to and fro on errands, then lamp wicks, then footsteps on the parapet. After a year the watchers keep you. He means that habit turns men into instruments that serve a larger calm. You're surprised by how comforted you feel by the thought that a human can be taught to be reliable, by being asked to be reliable. You sleep with a neatness in your bones and wake before the bar lifts, having decided that today you will pay attention to the edges of the habit, places where the pillars falter or the watchers slip, and see how the road repairs itself. The chance comes quickly. A Kos miner between the Sarai and the ferry has been bitten by last year's rain. The lower coat of lime has fallen away in patches, exposing brick the colour of a dried pomegranate seed. The pillar still stands. The message is regular, but the dignity is scuffed. 2 men with a donkey stacked with sacks of something chalky arrive at mid-morning. The sacks say lime with their own smell, an old sea hidden in stone. A boy leads, frowning at the sun as if calculating shade. You stand in the strip of tree shadow and watch the work, because the work tells you as much about the system as the result. One man scrapes the blistered skin with a curved knife. Soft strokes at first, then more certain. Not to the brick, he mutters. Never to the brick. He wants a roughness that will take the new coat without complaint. The other mixes in a shallow trough. Slaked lime, fine sand, water carried in 2 goat skins that smell more barn than river. He tests the pace between finger and thumb, sticky enough to cling, loose enough to be spread thin. The boy fetches water, keeps flies off with a fan of dry leaves, hands up the trowel. None of them is grand. All of them hold the road in place for people who will not know their names. When the first patch is smoothed and the surface gleams where wet meets dry, the older man straightens and looks up the road and down again, as if to ask the day for approval. He does not get poetry in reply. He gets a change in the wind that flips dust off the verge and a cartwheel that chooses the smoother rut. He smiles anyway, a small smile, the satisfaction of a thing repaired before it fails. The boy watches the lime blush from wet to dry and says, "Not to anyone." By the next watch it will be skin. He's learning time in the correct way, by observing materials, not numbers. You see why the system lasts, because it can be taught to those who read the world by touch and smell and sound, as easily as to those who read letters. The pillar does not require schooling, it requires attention. At the ferry you discover the other edge, what happens when timekeeping changes name. The boatman speaks of a town officer who arrived last cold season with a European clock that claimed to divide the day into 24 equal hours, and the hour into 60 smaller minutes that do not swell or shrink with season. The boatman admired the brass and the way the hands went round with a stubbornness that needs winding. He tried for a week to ring his horn by the minute. But the river does not care for minutes, he says, shrugging the same shrug as the watchman last night. She keeps watches. She turns under stars. She's polite to the moon, not to gears. He now uses both. The horn for the village shopkeeper who likes to say half past, the watch for the road that still divides its needs into pihars. You realise you're standing at a hinge that does not squeak because people have learned to oil it with common sense. You walk on, and the afternoon stretches behind you like cloth that has been pulled just short of tearing. You keep count without effort. 1 pahar since the ferry, another since the last pillar. Somewhere ahead, in a courtyard you have not yet seen, a ledger will acquire your name with a small intention mark beside it. How many watches you claimed yesterday, how many you plan to keep tomorrow, how many cows you think you can afford before the animals need a longer drink. The books are not surveillance. They are conversation carried across nights. They let the road whisper to itself and remember. As the light grows granular and the heat becomes memory rather than fact, you slow a little to keep the last pahar from bruising your feet. A child near a village gate recites his letters while his mother shells peas. The syllables fall out in time with your steps. He stumbles on a curve in the alphabet and starts again without fuss. The watches forgive small errors if the habit is steady. You forgive your own day the minute you see the next pillar. At last the Coles Minar appears in silhouette, the top softened by birds that prefer its view to the thorn trees. You stop, not because you are tired, but because stopping here dignifies the day. You lay your palm against the lime once more and feel the warmth the sun has left inside it. You have learned enough to name what is happening. The pillar is releasing the day back into the air. Its surface will cool by the second watch of night. By the third, the lime will hold a dew that goats will like to lick where the base has a crease. In the morning, when the first light presses the east face, the pillar will exhale coolness for travellers too thrifty to drink before they need it. A mina is a book written in temperatures that hands can read. You walk the last stretch to the Sarai thinking gentle thoughts about continuity. The system is old. It admits adjustment. Men will repaint after a flood, shift a miner's position when the road has dragged itself to one side after wagons choose a safer line, teach a new watchman to count pahars with his ears because his eyes tire early. The partnership between pillar and watch has space for human error and time's weather. It is not delicate, it is tolerant. In the courtyard, after the ledger has taken your coin and given you back an intention for dawn, you sit with a cup that has a chip you can live with and listen to the watch change. The staff taps once and then twice. Someone's lamp is pinched and relit. A boy runs to the gate with a small board on which he has written, in a careful, uneven hand, the news you already saw, repairs underway at the pillar by the ferry, plaster to be kept wet in the second watch so it cures well. The board hangs from a nail. The courtyard does not discuss it. It is enough that the words exist. You lie down, beside your bundle, and let the last sounds of the day sort themselves into categories. Arrangements, not events. Somewhere a donkey shakes its head with a jangle like loose coin. Somewhere a watchman coughs and swallows and coughs again, until the throat remembers how to be quiet. Somewhere a mother asks a child to sleep, and the child bargains for one more story. The road offers its own story to everyone, simple and exact. Count by pillars, rest by watches, trust those who keep either one in order. Just before sleep consents to arrive, you allow yourself one question shaped like a hinge. When the habit of hours and minutes asks to sit beside pihars and kos, will the old measures fold themselves into the new and keep speaking in the background, or will the pillars and watches be left to weather into scenery, while the road learns a different way to teach patience? By the time you leave the sarai at first light, you can feel the old system working inside you the way a reliable joint works inside a shoulder. You do not think of it, yet every motion depends on its patience. You keep a watch without owning one. You keep distance without counting steps. Your breath lengthens in the second PR of the morning, and you can almost predict the exact stride at which the next cosminer will present itself. Lime pale, brick-boned, a cylinder that makes arithmetic visible to the tired and the unlettered alike. Today, though, you decide to walk with a different attention, not only to what the pillars and watches do flawlessly, but also to how they bend when the world changes its habits. The road has taught you that a system shows its character at the edges, where it meets rocks, rivers, rulers, and new ideas that were not born when the first brick was set in wet lime. The first edge appears before noon, where the road flattens to meet a river ferry and then climbs into a market town busy enough to insist on its own rhythm. On the approach, the Kos miner leans an honest degree out of square, its base scuffed by hooves that have chosen the same line for years. Two boys are daubing its lower half with new lime, and you pause to watch their care. One scoops from a shallow pan and slaps the paste on. The other smooths with a trowel that has learned the curve of this pillar over many seasons. They do not make speeches about continuity. They scrape, mix, spread, and leave enough roughness for the new coat to grip. Behind them, at the ferry landing, a boatman argues gently with a shopkeeper about half past and next watch. The boatman insists that the river takes her orders in pahars, the slack, the turn, the pull of moon, while the shopkeeper points to a brass clock in his doorway that divides the day into equal slices no season can fatten or starve. You have seen this argument before, and you know how it is usually settled, not by victory but by layering. The boatman blows his horn by watch when the current matters, by hour when the town insists. The shopkeeper tells his suppliers to arrive by the second pihar when oxen set the pace, by 10 when a courier has a train to meet at a distant junction. The pillar stands between them like a mediator that has no need to speak. It is content to be read in both languages, a cost to one, about 2 miles to another, 40 minutes if the cart is light to a third. The miner is not jealous of new clocks. It is old enough to be hospitable. At the edge of town you find the second edge, milestones with chiselled numerals, low and rectangular, planted at shoulder's height so wheels will not kiss them to dust. They announce distances that a surveyor's chain has paced with a narrower appetite for variation than the old co's allowed. The numbers catch your eye because they promise a precision that looks like kindness, and often is. Yet you notice something else. Villagers point to the pillar when they give directions. Past the third miner, turn by the neem, they say. The stone with the chiselled 4 can be forgotten by a mind that has not learned to love numbers. The white column, visible from far and used by grandparents, refuses to fall out of memory. You're reminded that good measures become local not when they are exact, but when they are adopted by hands that also carry baskets. A line of posts strung with wire snakes along the road for a stretch, humming faintly in the heat. The presence of wire often predicts a different kind of insistence. Times imposed from afar, bells, whistles, schedules pinned to boards that are updated by clerks with pencils and lists. In places where the wire dips into a station yard, you hear a whistle that does not belong to a conch or a horn. You see a clock face that tells a single time for a sweep of country, larger than a day's walk. The clock does not argue with Pehars, it ignores them. And yet in the courtyard of a sarai a watch still changes when the lamp in the gate niche has burned a finger's width, when the staff has tapped twice without botching the spacing, when a boy, taught last season, sweeps the paving stones at a pace that makes dawn arrive on schedule for the sleepers who do not care which minute the sun chooses to use as a handle. The postman who shares a shade patch with you at noon laughs at the idea that one system will kill the other. When I carry letters to the station, he says, I walk by pillars and depart by clock. The station master wants 12:40. The bullock wants after the second pehar. The road wants both. He is not being philosophical. He is being obedient to the materials of his day. Hoof, iron, lime, wire. You like the matter-of-fact way he holds two measures in his head without letting them quarrel. In the afternoon the wind rises from the west and drives dust in patient sheets. The miners look like pale lighthouses for travellers who do not sail, and you are grateful that their shade still falls exactly where your discipline needs it. At 1, a mason has scratched a date that means nothing to your calendar but everything to his. Harvest past, monsoon mended, lime slaked well. You press your palm to the cool skin and feel water held in chalk, heat let go. You think, a pillar that has learned to breathe is a better teacher than any proclamation about progress. It tells you that the right unit for kindness is a handspan of shade when the sun is perpendicular. Toward evening, on a stretch of road that grows suddenly ceremonial as it approaches a large town, the cos miners stand a little farther from the track, as if pushed back to make room for parades. Here the new habit has the upper hand. Lamps on iron posts, numbers in neat enamel, whistles from a yard you cannot see. Still, you overhear two carters in the bazaar settle their plan in the old way. We'll rest at the second pillar after the bridge, wake in the third watch, and move to the fourth before the heat. They do not bother to translate into hours. They know the road will not call a constable if they measure their fatigue by watches rather than minutes. The road's law is fair when it lets truth wear the clothes a worker already owns. That night the sarai's gate has two boards hung side by side. On one, the muhara has chalked a timetable for the next day's carts to the station. Leave by second pahar if you need the morning whistle. On the other, the Mirror Sarai has copied, with a steadier hand, the distances to the next 3 pillars and the likely hour of the bar's fall if the clouds do not thicken. The two notices do not jostle, they keep each other honest. A traveller who reads both will not miss a train, and will not misjudge a dusk. You sleep with the easy mind of someone whose day has been divided into intervals that make sense to legs rather than to brass. In the early dark you wake briefly and hear a boy on the parapet whisper the count to himself. 1, 2, as he paces between ladder and corner. No clock face throws light up there. He is learning watches the old way, by making his body the instrument. You turn in your blanket and feel that the road is in good hands so long as such counting continues. In the morning, after you settle your account and receive the quiet question, how many watches will you keep today? You decide to follow the road to a place where its language changes again. A town with a courthouse, and a yard where weights and measures are inspected. You do not go for the courthouse. You go to watch a scale. On market day, the inspector unrolls a canvas, sets out official stones and checks merchants' measures against his own. The sight pleases you, not because it is severe, but because it belongs to the same family as the beam scale in a sarai niche, and the lime line that marks a pillar's repair. Systems survive when they are both enforceable and imitable. A banjara with no coin for stamped weights can still tap a cup against another and hear whether one lies. In a lane behind the court you meet an older man who keeps a small shop that sells wicks, rope, cup handles, and the little repairs that turn a courtyard back into a tool. He remembers when the first enamelled milestones were set, and he remembers, earlier still, when a ruler's officer ordered pillars lime-washed after a flood scabbed them green. We were told, he says, with the satisfied tone of a craftsman who remembers sense when he hears it, to keep distance visible and time audible. You ask whose order it was. He shrugs. Someone whose name will not help me fix a latch. The words were right. He treats the memory as a tool that does not rust. On the far side of town the road narrows, and with it the parade of changes. You re-enter the older grammar. Pillar, watch, bar, lamp. The afternoon light lengthens the miners' shadows into accurate promises. The evening watch produces the tap-tap that has calmed so many courtyards that even dogs lower their voices. Here, The new numerals on the low stones look shy, as if asking permission to sit near the elders. They're granted a place because travellers like more than one way to be certain. A widow with a bundle on her head uses the pillar to guess how many sips she can spare before dusk. The mule driver uses the stone to roughly match his pace to a station he cannot see. A messenger uses both and arrives without drama, which is the highest praise the road offers. You begin to think beyond the day, the way any traveller does when the pattern of the road begins to look like a lesson, not only a path. What lasts? The pillars will weather. Many already have, and you have seen goats take the shade of a miner on which a mason's trowel will never fall again. The watches will recede in towns that prefer whistles and bells to staffs and conches. Boys will learn minutes from clock faces hung in schools instead of from lamp wicks and parapet niches. Yet you suspect the old habits will not vanish so much as settle into the nerves of other things. A timetable is only a fussy watch. A milestone is a flattened pillar. The principle, make distance obvious, make time shareable, does not age. A courier passes you near a bend where the verge smells of crushed fennel. He carries a leather pouch with a stitched seal and a schedule more crowded than yours. But when he asks how far to the next serai, you watch his eyes slide past the enamelled 8 on a low stone and settle, with relief, on the white cylinder against the sky. 1 and a little, you answer, and he nods without asking for decimals. He's not nostalgic. He is efficient. A pillar is easier to see than a number when dust lifts. Late in the day, a herdsman you have walked alongside off and on tells you of winters when fog thickens until even lamps are halos without faces. In that foam, he says, the miners are the only certainties. We go hand to hand from one to the next. You picture men, with palms white from lime, moving through a world reduced to a breath's reach, and you understand why the cylinders have stayed dear even where new stones have been set. A measure that can be touched is friendlier than one that can only be read. Near dusk you climb a low rise and see at once how interval creates courage. A Kos miner stands on the far slope, and beyond it, just visible in the softening light, the square lip of a courtyard wall promises everything your body has learned to love without performance. A bar that falls, a ledger that remembers, a tank that keeps water cooler than your skin, a boy who will sweep, a watchman who will tap, a bandari who will count cups by sound. Between you and that promise lies only a known distance and a watch you know how to keep. This is the genius of the system. It turns a large country into a series of honest small decisions. You enter the serai with the ordinary ceremony, announce, be counted, water, cook, sweep your corner. On the gate bench a board carries 3 lines in a hand you have come to admire for its regularity. Pillar at the ferry relimed, carts to keep to old rut at culvert, second watch to check gate latch, pin loose. The messages are dull, their dullness is their virtue. Nations love drama, roads love arrangements. After the meal, the Miri Sarai, an even-voiced woman who walks with keys like a modest belle, sits for a moment on the platform edge and asks you where you learned to love pillars. You say that you do not love them, you trust them. She smiles as if you have paid her courtyard a compliment. We keep the watches, she says, so that other people can keep their promises. It is the neatest definition of administration you have heard. It includes emperors and boys with brooms in the same sentence, which is likely the only honest way to keep the road from growing lonely. You sleep, and in the deep night you wake to the small shift a watch makes when it hands itself to the next man. The staff taps twice. A lamp is pinched and then coaxed back to life. Somewhere beyond the wall, a jackal makes the sound jackals make when their hunger discovers it has a voice. You lie still and feel the old measure enter you again. The night divided into 4 patient pieces, each piece asking no more heroism than wakefulness and a steady step. You think of clocks that do not care whether the moon is thin or full, of enamelled numbers that throw rain the same distance in every season, and you are not offended by them. The road is large enough to hold both kinds of confidence. At dawn you settle your account and step out with the day. You pass the Kos miner at the edge of the field, and place your palm on its skin one last time. It is cool in the shadow, warm where the first light has lingered. You have learned to read those temperatures as footnotes. Last night was gentle. Today will allow a longer stride before noon. You smile at how little you needed to know in order to learn. So much. A cylinder of brick, a rule of watches, a habit of lime. You walk and the pillars take their rightful place in the background. the way mountains take their place behind a town that has learned to trust them. They appear when you need them, recede when you do not. You do not ask them to be beautiful, though in certain lights they are. You ask them to be there. They answer by being. By the time the road bends toward your next unremarkable night, you have reached a conclusion that does not require emphasis. Systems endure when ordinary people can carry them without supervision. A cos minor that any mason can scrape and any boy can whitewash needs no trumpet. A watch that any watchman can keep with a staff and a lamp needs no factory. This is how a ruler's will becomes a traveller's comfort, and then, after the ruler and the traveller have both been forgotten, a country's instinct. You leave the last pillar of the day behind you and enter the square of the Serai. The bar will fall, the ledger will remember, the watch will divide the night not to show off its counting but to shelter sleep. And sometime tomorrow, when you pass another white cylinder with a scuffed base and a line of new lime climbing a hand's width higher than last season, you will touch it again with a palm that keeps the road's memory as faithfully as any book. If one morning all clocks failed and all numbers washed from every stone, could a handful of pillars and the old habit of watches still move a country's work across a day? And if so, what does that say about the kind of knowledge that most deserves our protection? Water measured, fodder weighed, a bell marks the watch. The Miri Sarai's keys settle disputes, doors close, and caravans sleep under agreed protection. You hear the keys before you see the keeper. They speak in their small iron voices from somewhere along the arcade, a measured clink that is not decoration but punctuation. Brief notes that tell the courtyard without fuss that order is moving from one hinge to the next. The sound belongs to the Miri Sarai, the superintendent of this place, and it has the cool confidence of a habit taught by elders and expected by travellers. You have learned, after many nights, that a Sarai's serenity is not an accident. It is a made thing, shaped every dusk by hands that prefer steadiness to spectacle. The day has softened. The courtyard is a square of forgiving light, the tank in its middle holding a last coin of sun. Around the edges, doors sit open like mouths at rest. Inside some, mats are rolled. Inside others, a pot lid blinks with steam. The gate bench holds its ordinary parliament, the muharir with his ledger, a watchman whose staff leans against his shoulder like a quiet opinion, a boy running errands for the pandari with clay cups nested in his arms. Over this small state the Miri Sarai passes, neither lofty nor low, keyring looped through a sash, attention divided and accurate. You had imagined, when you first learned the title, a person who loved authority. The reality is more useful. The Miri Sarai loves procedure. When he pauses by the gate, his thumb tests the bar's seating without looking. When he glances at the ledger, his eyes do not search for names, they search for gaps, entries that should be there but are not yet written, dues that must be settled at dawn. When he nods to the watchman, it is not a courtesy. It is a rehearsal for the hour when a nod will suffice to prevent a small quarrel from thickening into trouble. You sit near the tank and observe the sequence that repeats in all honest courtyards yet always wears local detail. The Miri Sarai inspects the hearth strip first. Fires must live only at the outer edge, on 3 stones, with a pot low enough that sparks do not leap toward someone's bedding. He says nothing. He adjusts one stone with a toe so that a flame, rising, will touch iron, not reed. He moves on. At the bandari's stall he lifts a cracked cup and sets it aside for the shelf that travellers call for the poor, and he runs a finger along the edge of a shallow pan to judge grit. At the stable he lifts the latch, stares a count of breaths at a camel tether, and lowers the latch again. Tiny interventions hold big calm. Who appoints such a keeper? In older days, a governor's officer, with revenue in mind. Sometimes a town's elders, with reputation in mind. Often the road itself, with memory in mind. Someone whose father or aunt kept these keys before, and knew how to keep rules from hardening into cruelty. Here, the keeper is a woman with iron grey hair braided and tied low, a cotton shawl slung with no extravagance. She walks the parapet ladder once at dusk and once at dawn, to prove to herself that the rungs are sound. She knows the watchman's cough and the bandari's habit of counting by sound. Tap, tap, dull chink, and she knows the child who will try tonight to bathe a lamb at the tank unless told gently not to. None of this is written on a plaque. It is written in the way the courtyard breathes. When new travellers enter, dust on their hems, hope of supper stored behind careful faces, The Miri Sarai does not greet them first. She let the gate's arrangement approach them, the posted rates scratched into a board darkened with soot, the ledger's open page angled to catch the falling light, the staff within reach, the clay lamp with wick already trimmed for the hour when dusk becomes matter instead of mood. She appears when the pattern requires a human signature. Name, goods, animals, the Mahara asks. Destination, he adds. Not to pry, but to give the ledger the shape of a day that can be read backward if need arises. The Miri Sarai listens. Sometimes she asks for a pass, sometimes she asks nothing at all, because road-worn common sense is its own document, and because hospitality is not a favour here. It is the Sarai's job. Fees are simple and declared. Room space costs a handful of copper, stable space another, firewood by the armful against a notch on a post, and clay cups sold cheaply because they chip easily and the road eats them. You watch coins travel, one into a locked box for repairs, one into a smaller pouch for watchman's wages, one placed aside for oil and wick. Money here is not a mystery. It is a tool, like the keys. The keeper will pay the mason after rain cracks an arch, will bring lime when mildew wants a corner, will send the boy with a note to the kotwal when a matter grows taller than her keys can reach. None of this is dramatic. It is all that prevents drama. Rules. You have learned them by life, not lecture. Fires at the edge, lamps in niches, animals at the trough, never at the tank steps. Blades not sharpened after nightfall. Disputes heard near the gate where witnesses are plentiful and tempers shy. Sleepers to be wakened only by the watch or by need. Accounts settled at dawn with no bargaining, because bargaining is the noon habit and dawn's purpose is clarity. The Miri Sarai enforces each, not as a soldier enforces a line, but as a gardener thins a row, so that many can grow. You have seen her refuse a man's plan to tether a goat in the arcade, with a phrase that closes argument without injury. We do not let teeth near bedding. What exactly do the keys open? You have seen 4 in the ring, one heavy tooth for the gate's outer bar, one shorter for a store with spare rope and a box of nails, one thin for the small door that guards the Bandari's oil, and one whose use you have not watched. She carries them as if weight confers courtesy. When the hour comes to close the world in and keep it harmless, she does not perform. She acts. The bar drops with the sound you have come to associate with your own bones loosening. The gate's latch receives the iron without complaint. The watchman, on his own instinct, taps the staff twice on stone, a sound that says both the watch has begun and you may lay down your worry. The day's first incident, every day has one, is not an outrage. It is a question that needs a grown hand. A boy has brought an ember too close to the tank steps to relight someone's sputtering lamp. The ember falls, the coal rolls against a bit of wind-dried leaf. The Miri Sarai crosses the courtyard with the walk of someone who trusts her feet to know the stones. She nudges the coal into a damp patch with the end of her keyring and looks once at the child. It is not a scolding look. It is a look that says, we do not make work for water. She sends the boy to the bandari to return the borrowed ember in a clay spoon. The boy goes. Lesson taught. No voice raised. Rule remembered in the right muscles. Later a cart arrives with an axle that sings too sharply. The driver hopes to sleep first and wedge later. The Miri Sarai hears the pitch and cannot consent. She gestures toward the corner where a carpenter keeps a low box of tools allowed to him as a tenant of the courtyard, wedges trimmed from tough wood, a chisel, a mallet, a small bowl for oil. The carpenter earns not wages, but permission to work where carts must pass. He comes, squints, taps, quiets the song to a sensible murmur. The keeper watches until the pitch pleases her. She nods, which is how she writes safe in the air over the wheels. The driver pays in coin and gratitude in that order. The courtyard collects the sound of wheels that will not argue with the night. When food begins, the Miri Sarai's work becomes invisible if done well. She does not cook or serve. She trims the hour so that others can cook and serve without collision. She asks the Bandari to move his basket of onions 2 arm lengths away from the hearth line so that a child's skirt will not brush flame on a hurry. She tells the watchman to fetch water for an old woman whose knees do not admire the tank steps. She waits until the first lid lifts and the last lamp is lit and then performs the inspection, that only she will perform in exactly this sequence: gate, postern, parapet ladder, scale niche, stable latch, Bandari's bench, ledger lamp, gate again. It is a circle that teaches her without the need for paper, where a trouble could start tonight if it wanted to. You wonder where she learned this, and she answers you without knowing you asked. When a courier enters breath first, a packet knotted in oilcloth, she lifts a palm and leads him to the gate bench. She says to the Mahara, "Open the second book." This is not the ledger of names and fees. This is the small log for messages that must cross the courtyard's memory with a straighter line. A broken culvert 2 kos west, the faint rumour of a jackal pack at the verge, a road officer's instruction that carts walk a dip and not ride it. The keeper dictates, and the Mahara writes in a hand that will still be legible at dawn. You had not known there was a second book. There is always a second book when a place loves procedure. Night hoists itself. The bar is set fully, not to forbid the world, but to define the room in which rest will be made. You think of the old rulers who spread pillars and sarais like beads on a thread, and you realise their order would be hollow if it could not be practised at the scale of a door. The Mir-i-Sarai is the hand that makes policy human. The watchman is the ear that keeps it awake. The Muhashir is the eye that gives it memory. The keys are the instrument. In the first watch, the courtyard discovers its proper volume. Lamps tick as their wicks find the sweet height. A man with a stubborn cough sleeps on his side toward the wall to keep his noise curtained. A child negotiates with sleep and loses with dignity. The Mir-i-Sarai measures this all without being seen to measure it. From the parapet, the watch's staff taps twice. There are courtyards where it is a drum or a conch. Here it is wood on stone, a modest proof that time has not gone wild. The second incident arrives late, as incidents prefer. A trader cannot find the small pouch he wore tied under his sash. He's not loud. He's the sort who trusts procedure when tired. He reports at the gate. The Mahara glances at the Mir-i-Sarai, who nods in a way that arranges several things at once. The watchman closes the postern. The Pandari stops selling and steps around his bench, leaving it bare. The keeper asks the trader to describe the pouch, asks the Mahara to read the last 2 lines of arrivals, and asks the watchman to fetch the beam scale from its niche. She speaks as if stating a recipe that has fed people for years. The gate bench becomes a small court whose only advocate is order. Bundles are not upended. They are placed, opened where the owner opens them, with everyone watching but no one crowding. The beam hangs. An empty pan's evenness calms the air. The missing pouch reveals itself sooner than you expect. Not in someone else's bedroll, not under a bench, but under the trader's own bundled cloth, where it slid when he shook dust from a mat. The keeper does not smile. She dictates a line for the second book. Pouch sought, found in owner's bundle. Watch reminded, close postern first, speak low. The lesson is not no one stole. The lesson is, when a fear arrives, the pattern is older than the fear. You've begun to like her phrases. They are modest and precise. When a boy runs too fast with a jar and sloshes the tank steps, she does not say, "Be careful." She says, "Water likes to follow feet. Keep its invitation narrow." When a stranger offers to help by placing his bundle near the gate for safety, she says, "Your arms will remember better than our bench." None of this is carved into stone, but these are the lines on which a night rests without breaking. What of cruelty? It is an old worry in all places with rules. You attend to how she refuses it. When a quarrel between 2 cousins threatens to wake sleepers, she does not threaten. She moves the talk under the arch, where voices flatten, and points with her chin to the soot-darkened ruleboard. Fires at edge, animals at trough, no shouting after the bars fall. She adds, in a tone that has not needed to grow hard in years, "We have other words, if needed." The watchman's staff makes a soft sound as it settles against the post. The cousins return to the hearth-strip and occupy their mouths with bread. You ask the Mahara, when the keeper's round has carried her elsewhere, where the rules came from. He shrugs with affection. From earlier rules, from trouble remembered, from the price of oil, from the way sleep wants to be guarded. He has copied this set half his life, replacing boards when rain eats them, darkening scratches with soot when letters fade. Sometimes a traveller teaches us one, he adds, a way to stack packs so feet do not trip by the hearth. A leaf on a jar's mouth so water stays. Cool. The road teaches the sarai teaches the road. The keeper keeps the conversation polite. Near midnight she sits one moment on the platform edge, the only pause you have seen her take. Her fingers hook the keyring without looking. The iron kisses iron once, and the courtyard, which had not noticed itself breathing, releases another inch of ordinary tension. She looks toward the gate and listens to the parapet. She looks toward the tank and listens to the stable. She looks toward the scale niche and listens to the ledger lamp. The habit of her attention draws a circle around the square, and you think, this is the geometry that steadies miles of commerce and messages and ordinary hope. Not the height of walls, the width of care. You fall asleep on your mat with a confidence that feels older than your name. Sometime in the third watch, the courtyard changes key. Lamps dimmed, a whisper of dew settling on the lip of the tank, a rope creaking with a camel's turn. And you wake enough to know you're still inside a maid's safety. You hear the staff twice, and the thinnest scrape of a reed pen as the Mahara adds a line he had forgotten when supper's warmth made his fingers lazy. Even forgetfulness is repaired here. At first light, the Miri Sarai's sequence reverses. She's up before the bar lifts. She checks the parapet ladder, warms her fingers around a clay cup, and does the gate in 3 motions: bar, ring, hinge, so that the sound rises to a note travellers recognise. The courtyard draws in a little breath before letting the world back in. Accounts are settled while intention is still simple. Fees are given and received in a mood that does not invite theatre. The watchman unhooks the scale and returns it to its niche. The Bhandari counts cracked cups and stacks them for a traveller who will need them. The keys make their last circuit of the hour and come to rest against the sash like a flock returned to perch. You step to the bench and pay your dues. Room, hearth, 1 armful of wood, a cup. The Mahara bites a copper lightly and smiles with his eyes only. The Miri Sarai asks you, as she asks each traveller, the quiet question that places you in the road's arithmetic for the day. How many watches will you keep? You answer with a number that is a promise you can make. She nods, not because she requires it, but because a traveller's own intention is among the Sarai's best guards against foolishness. Before you go, you ask, almost shyly, about the keys. Whose were they before yours? She considers, not to think of the answer, but to see if it can be spoken without injuring the dead. My aunt kept them, she says at last. Before her, a man who kept goats too and liked to let kids rove in the arcade. The rule against teeth near bedding is his memorial. There is no smile when she says it. There is respect that a person's best lesson might be the rule born from their worst laziness. She touches the ring, once, and then places her palm on the gate's lintel as if blessing timber and hinge. You step out, lift your bundle, and turn once to look back. The courtyard is a picture of settled intention. Ledger open, lamp pinched, scale hung, broom leaned where a boy will find it without looking, the rule board with its letters freshly dark from the Maharia's wool, the parapet shadow already thinning under the dawn. The Miri Sarai is not visible now. The keys have gone quiet. The road waits with its familiar appetite for feet. As you find your pace, you carry away not only rest but a style of thought. Problems anticipated, words chosen before voices rise, mercy expressed as procedure, fairness written down so that memory cannot play favourites. It occurs to you that many houses would be happier if they had a Miri Sarai, and many offices would be quieter if someone loved keys the way she does not, as possessions, but as responsibilities that keep strangers safe together. You walk into the morning with an uncomplicated gratitude and one sensible question. When the keeper who likes rules that are not cruel must give her ring to the next hand, what ensures that the keys remain instruments of care and do not become trophies of power? You return to the same courtyard at another dusk, not because you are sentimental, but because the road has taught you to revisit places where the rules were kept without anger. The first thing you notice is that nothing dramatic has changed. This is a kind of excellence you learn to recognise only after miles. The excellence of reappearance. The tank still holds a square of sky. The ledger still opens on its hinge like a shoulder that has been well used and well oiled. The bar across the gate still leans, for now, against the wall like a sentence not yet needed. The Miri Sarai's keys announce her before she turns the corner, iron syllables in a language that sleep understands. You decide this evening to watch how the keeper's authority is built from pieces dull enough to be overlooked. You begin at the rule board, the soot-darkened plank whose scratches became your first school in this place. You mouth the lines as if reciting from a primer. Fires on the outer strip, animals in the stable quarter and at the trough only, lamps trimmed before the second watch, no shouting after the bar, accounts settled at dawn, blades not sharpened after dusk. None of these would earn a place in a chronicle, yet together they do more for safety than any speech about justice. The board itself shows its education, soot re-rubbed where the monsoon blurred letters, a nail moved twice as the wood shrank with dry weather, a corner rounded by hands that steady themselves while reading. You have questions about fees, because money turns rules into practice. You take your place at the bench while the muharir, who wears ink like freckles, props his wooden tablet to catch the last of the light. The rates are posted beside him, not as a threat but as a promise. Clay cup at cost because the road chips them quickly, and a traveller should not be punished for Clay's honesty. Armful of wood priced against a notch on a post, because men's memories grow generous when counting their own reach. Stable space per animal, because a camel and an ox eat differently, and fairness is a matter of appetite as much as arithmetic. The Muhara sweeps a line of copper into 3 piles, one for oil and wick, one for repairs, one for wages. You realise that the courtyard keeps its own internal budget like a small republic, and that the Miri Sarai's power partly comes from the way coin becomes lamp, lamp becomes watch, watch becomes sleep. A trader arrives with a request that sits awkwardly against the rules. He wants to keep his goods, dyed thread, near the gate so he can depart before dawn. The keeper listens, her head tilted a fraction, keys motionless. "Your arms," she says, "remember better than our bench." A refusal phrased as a compliment. The trader laughs, rueful, and carries his bundle to the cell assigned him. The Miri Sarai adds no scolding to the exchange. She adds a small instruction to the air by turning to the watchman and touching the niche where the beam scale hangs. It is not fetched, it is only remembered. You understand the meaning. In case of a quarrel, we choose instruments before voices. At the Bandari's stall, you linger to read the inventory that never sits still. Salt, a handful of asafwetida wrapped in cloth, ghee in a clay jar with a flatter lip than yesterday's, wicks coiled like small snakes, a twist of rope, a whetstone worn to a river-soft oval. Prices here are less posted than agreed, with the Miri Sarai's ear always nearby. When 2 pilgrims argue softly about the cost of a second wick, one claims he was charged less at the last courtyard. The keeper drifts close enough that both instinctively round their tones downward. "Show the last one," she says, and the pilgrim produces a stub blackened halfway. "This one longer," she says, pinching the new coil between finger and thumb. "You paid for the rest already." It is arithmetic placed gently in the palm. The pilgrims nod. The Pandari hides a smile and adjusts his stack of cups, tapping them, sound, chink, to sort the cracked to the shelf for those who cannot pay full. You turn your attention to night watches, because time here is as much a tool as line. The staff that taps the parapet is not a symbol, it is a metronome for human duty. The keeper begins to lay out the evening's cadence the way a cook lays out ingredients. She instructs the first watch to make a slow circuit of the parapet after lamps are trimmed, the second to check the gate latch once and the stable latch twice, the third to refill the jar near the tank so early risers do not draw the basin before the birds have had their hour, the fourth to wake the Mahara halfway through, because even ledgers deserve fresh eyes before dawn. None of this is written down in her hand. It is written into men by repetition and into space by wear, the flattened places at step turns, a polished spot at the latch where fingers have counted years. It is a narrow pleasure to notice how the courtyard anticipates failure. On the inner face of the gate hangs a clay pot of water with a rag cord trailing from its mouth. The slow drip keeps the wood from shrinking bitterly in the heat and holds the hinge's temper steady. At the parapet ladder a peg holds a spare rung cut to length, notched and ready for the hour when wood gives a splintering cough. In the niche near the scale, a folded strip of cloth waits to bind a cut hand. On the Bandari's bench, a potsherd serves as a scoop so that men do not plunge their fingers into the salt and make a brine with sweat. These arrangements are not charity. They are the infrastructure of patience. The evening's first test of rule comes disguised as generosity. A wealthy traveller, road-tired and proud of paying, offers to buy oil for all the lamps at once so the place will shine. The keeper declines without insult. "Lamps know their measure," she says, and the phrase is both courtesy and refusal. Too bright a courtyard invites talk that runs long. Too many shadows invite fear. The night requires a grammar of light that is legible to sleepers. She thanks him for the thought and directs his coin toward the repair box with a glance so slight that only the Muhara catches it. He rubs the copper with his thumb and drops it in with the sound of a problem postponed. You ask quietly about punishment, because rules without teeth become wishful thinking. The Muhara shrugs toward the gate where the rule board hangs and the watchman leans. First the board, he says, then the staff as sound, not blow, then the kotwal. He says the last as if naming a hill one would prefer not to climb at night. In practice, you have seen how the Miri Sarai avoids summoning outsiders, by intervening early, by making men save face while they change their minds, by handing disputants a task that steals heat from words. Carry water, she tells two quarrellers after a snapped rope produces insults. They carry, they return with cooler faces. She ties the new rope herself, so no one must admit the other knows knots better. A courier arrives with news that tightens the series of watches like a belt before a climb. A caravan robbed 2 days' march distant. The talk travelling faster than proof. He has no names, only a place and a smell of fear in his words. The Miri Sarai does not turn the courtyard into a fort. She adjusts the recipe. No outer fires tonight, she says. All hearths on the inner strip. Second watch. 2 men at the parapet instead of 1. She does not rouse the entire population to vigilance, because panic is expensive and sleep is cheap defence when the bar is steady. She has the Muharshia chalk a square. On the board by the gate, 1 extra lamp at the postern, and writes in the second book a line that will travel with the post. Rumour of theft. Precautions taken. No incident. If trouble comes, there will be a sequence of acts already prepared. If it passes, there will be no wasted alertness to sour the next night. You follow her to the stable quarter, where the smell is a ledger of fodder and patience. Here authority is quietest and most necessary. The stable boy wants to let a calf wander because its soft nose makes him laugh. Teeth and bedding, the keeper says, repeating the maxim that turns kindness into order. She shows him the low rope that keeps animals from backing toward doorways in the dark, the way a brick under a trough's lip prevents a slosh that would turn to slime by morning. She's not unkind to animals, she is kind to sleepers. You understand that rules here are the grammar of consideration, not the weapons of control. At the hearthline a woman cooking dal glances up from her pot and says to the keeper what no one else would dare say. You walk too much. It is affection disguised as chiding. The Miri Sarai stops, if only to prove she can. If I sit, she says, the keys grow heavy. She means that idleness teaches iron to be ornament rather than instrument. Still, she allows herself a perch on the platform's edge and drinks water from a clay cup whose rim shows the old chink on one side. There is a discipline even in her pause. She sits where anyone can reach her by 2 strides. The watchman relaxes by a thumb's width. You notice, as night thickens, that fairness has a geography in this courtyard. Hearth spaces are apportioned by width of pot and size of family. The Miri Sarai's eyes keep the measuring honest. A man tries to smuggle his bedding farther along the platform to occupy a bit of corridor. Keep the path, she says, and he yields. The rule exists not because corridors must be pretty, but because a boy may need to run in the 3rd watch to fetch the log or the scale. And running should be easy where sleep makes minds slow. The architecture itself enforces justice. The raised edge keeps hearths contained. The step down invites feet to remember the common level. The second watch arrives with its twin signatures. The staff tapping in the parapet's long pause, the bar settling deeper into the notch with its slightly different note as wood cools. The Miri Sarai lifts the beam scale from its niche and hangs it in the gate shadow, not because she expects a quarrel, but because her experience tells her that display of instrument decreases demand for judgment. A traveller, seeing the balance ready, decides not to argue about a measure of ghee. The keepers avoided a dispute by placing a possibility within sight. Near midnight, the incident that will be remembered, not sensationally but as a lesson, appears as small as all such incidents do. A spark jumps from a pot when a handful of dry twigs enter flame too fast. The spark lands in a ravel of rope. The boy who fed the fire freezes, eyes huge. The Miri Sarai moves without haste, snatches the cloth kept near the scale niche, and lays it over the ember like a gate lowered across a rumour. Smoke breathes once and dies. She says nothing to the boy then, because rescue and lesson are different foods and must be eaten at different times. In the morning she will show him how to lay twigs into flame as if whispering rather than shouting. Tonight she walks to the rule board and with the Muhara's reed adds 4 words to a line. Fires tended with small wood. The board grows wiser, the courtyard sleeps. It occurs to you that part of the keeper's strength comes from a decision about memory. Nothing is allowed to vanish without leaving a trace that can be used. The second book remembers messages. The ledger remembers names and dues. The rule board remembers disasters averted. Objects remember functions. The spare rung at the ladder, the drip at the gate, the brick beneath the trough, so people do not have to perform heroics. Mercy here is the ability to be ordinary. You test your own skepticism. What happens when a keeper loves control more than care? The Mughal answers with a sideways story. Once a man took the keys who liked to lock early, he says. He wanted quiet so much he made it crack. Travellers missed the dusk. Quarrels grew because men resented lost minutes. The Bandari's accounts soured because lamps sold less oil before the bar dropped. The elders of the town removed him without noise. Keys are not fences, the Mughal says, returning his attention to his nib. They are levers. You think of the current keeper's phrase, rules that are not cruel, and you realise such phrases are the immune system of the place. You ask quietly who will inherit the ring when these hands tire. The Narration, hearing a question never quite spoken, answers with a practice rather than a prophecy. She invites 2 people to follow her round tonight, a younger watchman with careful eyes and the Pandari's daughter, who knows already how to count cups by sound. She gives them each a part to speak, the sequence of locks, the order of checks, the way to listen for a hinge going sour. The keys are being taught long before they are given. Authority practiced ahead of inheritance remains a tool. Authority bestowed all at once becomes a prize. You admire a succession plan written in footsteps. Somewhere beyond the wall, toward the road that threads away into other courtyards, the jackal's voice files a report. The watchman lifts his head, listens, lowers it. The sound carries no hunger to the inner square. You're tempted to call this safety simple, and then you think of how many exercises of attention have made it. You know now that the more even the night, the more complicated the care that keeps it even. It is the same with sentences. The ones that, read smoothest, have been corrected the most. Before the 4th watch gives itself to dawn, you let your eyes move not across people, but across the instruments that outlast them. Key ring on sash, beam scale in niche, rule board on nail, spare rung at ladder, water jar at gate, ledger lamp trimmed low. These are the furniture of justice in a place that has no gavel and no throne. You understand why the keeper keeps touching wood and iron as she walks. She is reading her charges with her hands. At first light, the courtyard's procedure unwinds in reverse. The choreography you find prettier each time because it refuses flourish. The bar lifts with the note that means the world may enter. Counts are settled in the hour when minds are least inclined to invent. The Bandari sorts the cracked cups to the shelf for those who cannot pay. The watchman returns the beam to its niche and rubs the hook bright with his thumb. The Mughal draws a diagonal through the oldest entries where travellers left before the gate's full opening. The Narration asks the question that sets a day's spine. How many watches will you keep? Men answer with numbers that are promises to their feet. You take your turn at the bench and pay for room, hearth, a measure of wood, a clay cup whose rim you chipped by inattention. The Mughal, without irony, slides a cracked cup toward your stack. For the road, and you accept it thinking of the shelf where such cups wait, proof that a place is more generous when its generosity has a system. You hoist your bundle and pause, failing to disguise your desire to say something weighty to the keeper. She spares you the effort. Leave the corner as you found it, she says, not unkindly. She knows that a traveller's best eloquence is tidiness. Outside the gate, the road meets you with a face you know, dust that tastes of flour, a sky that measures its blue in watches, a cos minor waiting to be counted by a body that has learned to count without anger. You walk a dozen paces, and then look back one last time, not to be romantic, but to write a line in your own ledger. This is what order sounds like when it is humane. Keys like a soft bell, a staff like a metronome, a beam that hangs straight without being asked to judge, a board that remembers, a hand that refuses to let rules harden into punishment. You step on, and the question that rose at the end of last night rises again, steadier now for having watched how the place trains its successors. If a courtyard's peace depends on rules that are not cruel, how do you make certain that the next keeper, the one who will inherit these keys and this board and this staff, has learned to love procedure for the sake of strangers rather than for the pleasure of command. You return again to the same courtyard at a season's turn, not because you cannot bear novelty, but because you have understood that the best places on the road are those that remain predictably. Themselves in the face of time, the neem at the gate has thrown a fresh ruff of green. The parapet shows a pale new patch where lime has dried to a quiet blush. The tank wears a fringe of floating leaves and the neat suggestion of a broom's last sweep. It is the hour before dusk, the courtyard's most teachable hour, when the day has not quite let go and the night has not yet begun to insist. You take a seat at the outer edge, near the ruleboard, because you mean to watch the keys pass from one hand to another. The Miri-Sarai notices you without making a show of it. She's the same woman who taught the place to breathe without noise, iron grey hair braided low, shawl wrapped without flourishes, keyring looped through a sash like a tool, not a badge. Tonight she is not walking alone. At her shoulder moves the younger watchman, the one with careful eyes who counts bahars by the feel of lamp wicks, and the Panduri's daughter who can tap cups and sort cracked from sound by ear. You can see the lesson before you hear it. She has not written it on a board. She is writing it into bodies. Gate first, she says, and the 3 words are a table of contents. The watchman lifts the bar by a hand's breadth only, checks the grain where wood meets iron, lowers it gently. We listen for tightness, the keeper says, not drama. She shows them the water pot hung on the inner face, the rag tail that keeps the plank honest in heat. Thirst turns timber mean, she adds, and the sentence is funny to those who love timber, which is to say those who keep people safe. They walk the hearth strip. Fires already live on 3 stone triangles set just far enough from the platform's lip that sparks must leap twice to cause trouble. The keeper toes 1 stone inward so the next pot will settle without wobble. If flames must reach, she murmurs, let them learn to reach where iron waits. She asks the Panduri's daughter to name the corridor kept clear between hearths and doors. For running, the girl says. The keeper nods, satisfied not by the word but by the tone. Unembarrassed, factual, mercy lives in corridors. At the Bandari's bench, inventory is a chant. Salt, ghee, wicks, rope, a small pot shard scoop, onions, asafoetida, a whetstone with the shape of a river-smoothed egg. Prices are not argued, they are remembered aloud. The Muharir sits nearby with reed and tablet, angled toward the last light. He totals quietly, 3 piles of copper as always, repairs, oil and wick, wages, and he sings the numbers under his breath like a man measuring cloth for a sleeve. The keeper lets the watchman recite the rule board in order. Fires outward, animals at the trough, blades not after dusk, accounts at dawn, and corrects nothing. When he hesitates, she touches the line with 1 knuckle, and he finds his place. This is how a place prevents the future from arriving all at once. The first test arrives with a cart that sings a gersas, a crooked note. You have learned to hear it by now, a high, argumentative sound from the right-hand hub. The driver hopes to postpone his embarrassment. In morning, he says, patting the wheel as if it were a child whose tantrum will pass. The Miri-Sarai tilts her head. The carpenter sits already on his box. He lifts a wedge, taps it like a bell and smiles at the tone. This one, he says, and the keeper gestures. The repair is small but immediate, a sliver trimmed, a wedge eased, oil kissed into the scene. Wheels that quarrel at dusk make courtyards quarrel at midnight, the keeper says to her apprentices, not to the driver. The driver pays by coin, and relief. A courier arrives with the dust of 5 coes on his ankles and a packet tied with waxed thread. He drinks, says, culvert, east, sag, and hands over a line written in a town clerk's hand to prove the word is not gossip. The keeper nods once and directs the Muharir to open the second book, the thin ledger for messages that must survive sleep. Write it plain, she says. The watchman reads the line back with the careful rhythm of a man who knows his voice is another kind of ink. The Panduri's daughter carries the chalkboard to the gate and rubs the soot smooth with a rag. She writes, carts to be walked, not ridden, at the 4th dip. Peha marks are scratched above the words like small moons, so those who count watches rather than minutes can read the caution through their own grammar. You think. Administration is the art of phrasing safety in everyone's language. You have come to witness a transfer, but what you see first is reinforcement. The Narration makes a round whose route you could now draw in the dust with your finger. Gate, rule board, hearth strip, banderies bench, tank lip, scale niche, stable latch, parapet ladder, gate again. At each station she invites one of her 2 students to act. The watchman checks the ladder's pegs, touches the spare rung and says, "Sound." The girl lifts the beam scale from its niche and hangs it so the empty pans sit honest. "We show it," the keeper says, "so arguments can shrink." It is one of her sentences you wish to fold into a pocket. Night lowers itself onto the courtyard in a series of small negotiated steps. Lamps pinched and coaxed, the bar settled to its evening note, the staff's double tap on the parapet like a modest drum. The first watch begins, men eat. Children fall sideways into sleep as predictably as pots simmer when the last of the evening wind dies. You know by now that the incident of a calm night usually arrives disguised, not as a blow, but as a misunderstanding. It comes as a misunderstanding of generosity. A well-dressed man, proud shoes, tired eyes, announces he will pay the fees for the 2 pilgrims nearest him because God is kind when roads are long. The pilgrims stiffen. Kindness in public can rub a man backward. The keeper glides into the space before words. "Harden, we have a shelf for cups with cracks," she says, pointing to the banderies left. "We also have a box for coins that do not need a name." The well-dressed man understands a way out when it is handed to him. He places the copper in the repair pouch and nods toward the pilgrims without looking. Dignity remains unbruised. The rule board has no line for this. The keeper's tone is the rule. Your attention slides to the stable quarter because trouble loves rope. A calf noses the corridor, tempted by a pooling of lamplight as if light were edible. The stable boy, fond beyond discipline, makes the soft noise people make when they want animals to think better of their nature. The keeper does not scold him. She shows him the brick under the trough's lip and the low rope that bars the quarter gently. "Animals are innocent of corridors," she says. "We make the corridors for sleepers." She looks at the watchman. "Third watch. Check brick. Check rope." He nods. He has learned to hear an assignment as a shared promise. The night's more serious trial arrives late, as such things prefer. A trader from the afternoon, careful, exact, with a bundle of dyed skeins, discovers a shortfall when he recounts before binding the load. He suspects correctly that he miscounted before tea. He suspects, incorrectly, that the boy who moved his bundle earlier to keep it from splash, another courtyard, another night, has a thief's hands. He approaches the gate with an expression you recognise, a man fighting his own haste. The keeper lifts her palm, the signal that converts heat into procedure. "Postern closed," she says. The watchman slides the bolt. "Scale," she says, and the pandery's daughter hangs the beam, pats the pans to even. "Describe the missing," the keeper says to the trader, and he does, repeating the weight to the nearest handful of grain. She asks neighbours to place their bundles on the platform. She does not say, "Open them." She says, "Open your own." Pride survives. Skeins are counted. A stray hank is found not in a neighbour's bundle, not under a mat, but tucked into the fold of the trader's own sash where he stuffed it absent-mindedly when someone greeted him at sundown. The laugh that follows is the laughter of relief that does not require humiliation. The keeper dictates a line to the second book. Hank misplaced found, postern closed first, beam shown. The phrase is not poetry. It is a manual for future nights. You watch the ledger lamp lower its flame to a manageable throat. You listen to the staff mark the second watch. You expect calm, and the courtyard, pleased by your expectation, answers with calm. A dog coughs beyond the wall, a cart's axle settles with a sigh. A sleeper dreams loud enough to make his neighbour chuckle and turn. The keeper makes her small round again, not because she doubts the earlier round, but because repetition is the cost of preventing drama. When she comes to the scale, she does something you have not seen. She lifts one pan clear and rubs the hook bright with her thumb. "Rust exaggerates," she tells the girl, who watches with her head tilted like a sparrow's. "It makes things heavier than they are." It is a remark about metal and about judgment. The transfer happens without drum. At the parapet ladder, between second and third watch, the Narration unloops the ring from her sash and balances it on her palm. The watchman and the pandery's daughter stand too straight, by which you know they are trying not to be important. Keys are levers, the keeper says, the sentence you heard the Mughal say last time, now arriving from its true author. They lift, they do not fence. If you love the fence more than the lift, the elders will relieve you, and I will not be sad. She weighs the ring in one hand and names each tooth out loud with its charge. Gate bar, store of ropes and nails, oil room, postern. She places the ring on the girl's palm and leaves it there long enough to teach weight, then puts it briefly on the watchman's, then takes it back. Tonight I keep them, she says. Tomorrow you will keep them together. After that, only one of you will wear them, and the other will know where they sleep. Succession here is an apprenticeship in tone. Why the girl? A man at the hearth whispers. Not to challenge, but because he would like to tell the story accurately later. The keeper hears without being told. She counts cracked cups by sound, the keeper says. People who can hear small faults mend large ones with less anger. You take the sentence like a datum into your own practice, whatever it will be when you leave the road. The watchman does not sulk. He smiles at the girl and says, "You keep the ring. I will keep people kind to it." You think, the courtyard is teaching both to love procedure for strangers, not for command. This is the transfer that matters. The third watch leans toward dawn. The courtyard cools. The tank's rim sweats a patient dew that the earliest birds accept as if it were custom. You stand when the Mir-i-Sarai stands, because a traveller's politeness is to let the keeper conclude her night without an audience. Still, you see one more act you want to remember. She stops at the rule board and, with the Muharrir's read, refreshes the soot in the letters that have blurred. She adds no new rule, she darkens the old. The most conservative act, you realise, is to keep good rules legible. At first light, the choreography unwinds. Bar up, hinge eased, staff tapped, ledger angled, dues settled. The Muharrir bites a copper, the Bandari taps cups. The watchman returns the beam to its niche. The girl coils wicks around her fingers into a small ring like a modest crown. The Mir-i-Sarai turns to the two and says only, "This evening." It is both a promise and a command. She will put the ring on one of them at dusk. The courtyard, which has slept well, does not feel the need to cheer. You pay your own dues in the hour when memory is most accurate. Room, hearth, an armful of wood, one cracked cup taken for the road because you chipped it. The Muharrir slides a thin shard of pot toward you without comment to serve as a scoop on the next night you will borrow salt. The keeper asks the question that makes men honest to themselves. How many watches will you keep today? You answer with a number that fits your feet. She nods, which is her signature on your plan. Outside the gate you turn. You always turn, not to be sentimental, but to let the place imprint the one detail you might otherwise forget. Today, it is the angle of the scale's hook catching a thread of light. You walk, and the road resumes its old voice. Cos minors as reassurance, dust as flower, the sun as a metronome set to Pahas. Your thoughts are orderly, because the night was orderly. You carry away the transfer like a piece of paper you did not tuck into your bundle, but somehow found there anyway. You think as you walk of the difference between hard rules and hard hands. The rules here are simple and old because they were born from common annoyances: sparks, hooves, spilled water, pride. They survive because each has been rubbed against people until the sharp edges went dull and the strong edges stayed strong. The hands here are firm and soft at once, trained to move before trouble grows teeth and to stop before pride grows horns. You try the sentences the keeper left you, one by one, as a traveller tastes dry fruit to judge sweetness. Keys are levers. We listen for tightness, not drama. We show the beam so arguments can shrink. Rust exaggerates. Lamps know their measure. Teeth and bedding, never. Will the next keeper keep them? The question was the hinge of this visit. You've seen the answer written in the method of the transfer more than in the fact of it. The girl learned by touching iron, not by swearing oaths. The watchman learned by sharing care instead of surrendering it. The Muharrir learned, as he always does, by writing down what prevents panic. The elders in town will not need to interfere because the courtyard has made the succession legible before it required ceremony. Keys do not change places in a void. They cross a bridge built from habit. That is why this courtyard will remain itself when the neem throws thicker shade and the patch on the parapet has weathered to the colour of the older wall. You pass a cos minor and lay your palm on its lime. It has warmed already. It will give back coolness at noon. You think of the courtyard you left and of many others, a beadwork of squares across a long spine of road, each steady because someone loved procedure in a way that honoured strangers more than it honoured self. You compare that love to the taste for command that sometimes rides into courtyards on proud shoes. One makes the gate bar sound like a promise, the other makes it sound like punishment. You know which sound carries farther without needing to shout. The road humbles all sermonising. You find yourself reducing the night's learning to the small acts you can practice, even when you forget the sentences. Check the latch, keep corridors clear, show the instrument that will be used before anyone is tempted to raise their voice. Add a line to the second book when the world sends a rumour. Darken the old letters rather than carving new ones for the pleasure of seeing your hand in fresh soot. These are portable virtues. You can apply them on stretches of path that were never governed from a palace, and in houses that have no rule board but need one. By late morning you pass another sarai, smaller, quieter, wearing its own habits with the dignity of old cloth turned inside out. You do not enter. It is enough to know that inside keys ring like a modest bell, a beam hangs honest, a staff taps stone twice each watch, and a ledger lamp warms the ink for names that will be read backward at dawn if trouble requires. This is how a road stays one road. Near noon, as the light scours corners and forces shade into discipline, you test the keeper's phrases against a more modern picture. A room with glass windows and paper schedules hung in pairs, one with minutes, one with pehars, because the region is learning to love both at once. The thought does not irritate you. The keeper's grammar will translate. Keys that are levers can open any hinge. Lamps that know their measure will not demand to be electric to be just. A beam that hangs even makes computers safe, as surely as it does sacks of ghee. The virtue is not in the object, it is in the habit that arranges objects so strangers sleep without anger. Your feet decide the afternoon before your mind does. You take the left branch at the neem with the scar and aim for the next courtyard by habit, rather than by calculation. It occurs to you that when you someday tell the story of the night the keys were almost, but not quite, transferred, you will not mention the names of those who watched. You will mention the sentences. Perhaps that is the best memorial for a keeper who likes rules that are not cruel, to let her words do the work after her hands have grown tired. Evening finds you where evening likes to find travellers, near a square of wall welcoming your shadow, near a bench with a ledger, near a tank whose surface remembers the broom. You present your name and your coin. You are shown a cell with a niche. You settle the small question of wood and wicks. You find the hearth strip. You cook a simple pot. It is another courtyard, similar and distinct, a cousin with the same bone structure and a different laugh. As lamps take their places and the staff's double tap declares the first watch, you feel the old safety unroll across the square like a mat. You stretch your legs and think not about what you have earned today, but about what you have inherited. You drift towards sleep with a thought that asks for no audience. That civilization is the art of turning keys into instruments that lift, not fence, of teaching successors by letting them carry weight before they carry titles, of writing rules that keep corridors open and tempers cool, of honouring the dull tools, beam, bar, bowl, board, where justice actually lives. You're not sentimental about it. You're traditional in the quietest way a road approves.